The mountains were snow-covered. The bird on the tree branch was also covered with snow. There was snowfall in the village. All the surrounding areas were covered with snow. A huge white rabbit in a t-shirt with an angry face flew over the houses, giggling. He was something of a referee in this game. The rabbit greeted the players and informed them that this game was balanced and based on logic. The first player was a dark-haired guy in a green tracksuit. The second player was a blonde girl in a blue and white dress with bows and ruffles, and she had a headband on her head. The rabbit jumped towards them, crossing his arms over his chest. He said that the first stage of selecting players will be relatively simple. The main character named Ju-wen, a guy with dark hair, had bright green eyes. He exhaled steam from his mouth. The girl in the dress was named Lu Meng, and she had amber eyes. She looked at the snowfall, placing her palms under the snowflakes. Flakes of snow fell on her hands. As soon as the snow touched Lu Meng's palms, her eyes immediately sparkled. She exclaimed with delight and said that the first stage for beginners in the game haven't felt like the real world. Lu Meng then rubbed her hands with her palms and told Ju-wen that it was a little cold here. The guy hid his face in the collar of his windbreaker. The girl looked at him. The guy looked straight and with an emotionless face answered her that it was very cold here. She looked at the guy doubtfully. The white rabbit hung over the players' heads. His huge head was pointed straight at Ju-wen and Lu Meng. He informed them that players are prohibited from taking any weapons with them, otherwise they will be automatically thrown away. And the game also does not catch the net. Ju-wen stood calmly and waited for further instructions. Rabbit congratulated him on becoming a special numbered player. His number is 6, which means lover in this game. Rabbit said that it was not possible to determine the specific appearance of the main character in the game. Lu Meng smiled and clasped her hands together, asking if Ju-wen was really a numbered player, and then said that she had only seen such players online. But today was the first time she had seen one in person, and it was amazing. Ju-wen hid his lower face in his collar and closed his eyes. He told her that once the game starts, there is a chance that the numbered players will not survive. Lu Meng was embarrassed and shyly agreed with him, saying that the manual said that punishments were given randomly, so it was actually quite dangerous. The girl clenched her fist and looked at Ju-wen confidently. She asked him not to worry, since she had previously watched many playthroughs in communities about strategies. She promised that she would not let him lose. Ju-wen turned his head towards her and said nothing. He noticed the pendant on her neck in the shape of a deer's head and asked what kind of relationship she had with her sister and whether they were close. Lu Meng immediately approached Ju-wen and said that when people ask such questions, there is some kind of story behind them. She asked if he had a sister. The guy pulled back slightly and answered affirmatively, albeit in few words. Lu Meng felt that this was not enough. She asked for details with an interested face. Ju-wen closed his eyes and lowered his head, answering her that his sister had died. Lu Meng felt embarrassed that she made him remember this. She immediately took a step back and with a guilty face began to calm him down and ask him not to be sad. Ju-wen did not answer her. He looked up and said something was coming. Lu Meng looked at him blankly. A rabbit came galloping towards them, standing right behind them. The wind from the rabbit's jumps almost lifted the girl's dress. The huge rabbit looked up at them and said that this stage had been chosen as a test for the selection of players. Lu Meng looked at the rabbit a little angrily and embarrassed. Ju-wen was calm. A rabbit with a creepy face announced that there are 2 players and they are given 72 hours to complete. He reminded players to pay special attention to the conditions for completing this stage. The game will begin in 5 seconds. The rabbit began counting down, showing the number 5 with his fingers. The sky began to darken in front of Ju-wen and Lu Meng. The girl turned around in confusion, looking around. Ju-wen also began to look around. He remained calm. When the countdown ended, Lu Meng lost her balance due to the snow under her feet. An inscription appeared on the snow saying that the white rabbit has 100 matches. Ju-wen looked at the inscription thoughtfully and asked whether it was a mathematical riddle or a logic question. Lu Meng grabbed the guy's sleeve and looked at the inscription in surprise. Several system windows appeared under the task. This task is worth 15 points. Due to the lack of specific conditions for solving it, players do not need to get all the points. Any number of them is enough to pass this stage. All conditions for this stage will be shown as soon as the player earns points. You have 5 minutes to answer. Players need to act quickly and look for clues in the game to solve the problem. After 5 minutes, if no answer is given or is given incorrectly, players will lose the right to play this game and their accounts will be deleted immediately. Ju-wen was calm. He began to think about solving the problem. Lu Meng crouched down to the written problem and asked what it was. Ju-wen went the other way. He turned to the girl and replied that they needed to look for clues. He noticed the snow-covered wooden sign next to him. The snow completely covered everything that was written on the sign. Lu Meng snapped her fingers. She sat down next to the problem written in the snow and with a smile on her face said that she understood everything, and that they were talking about it in the group about strategies. The girl said it was a typical math problem. Lu Meng began to write the word solution next to the problem with her fingers, saying that if you write this word, you can earn points. The girl stopped abruptly. Some white liquid fell on top of her. She raised her head and saw a strange creature that was twice as tall as her. Lu Meng stared blankly at the monster as liquid ran down her face. The monster looked at her with its mouth wide open. Zhu Wen read on the table that anyone who left the village without the village chief's permission would be punished according to the law. The guy looked thoughtfully at the sign and did not understand in accordance with what law, and whether this was a clue. The rabbit judge announced that player Lu Meng answered the question incorrectly, and therefore her account would be deleted. Zhu Wen, hearing this announcement, abruptly turned away from his thoughts. The rabbit appeared in front of the girl, looking straight at the guy. He said he had 20 seconds left to answer. The rabbit started counting down. Zhu Wen ran towards the girl and the monster with lightning speed. Lu Meng sat still and could not move from fear. The rabbit looked at them creepily with his red eyes. The monster has already opened its mouth to eat the girl. Lu Meng cried and trembled with fear, begging Zhu Wen to help her. Zhu Wen frowned and opened his mouth slightly as he ran towards her. He extended his hand forward, but smoke appeared around him. In this smoke, the image of the girl began to collapse. Tears were visible in her eyes. There were drops of blood around. Zhu Wen still extended his hand forward. The white monster closed its mouth, clenching its huge teeth. Zhu Wen was extremely focused on his goal. He hit the monster in the face with all his might. The blow threw the monster to the side, and it collided with a tree. The guy continues to run towards his goal. The rabbit frowned angrily as he continued the countdown. Zhu Wen put his hand on the ground to stop. He found a stick somewhere, with which he began to quickly write something under the task. After he finished, he raised his hand with the stick up. Under the problem written in the snow, the guy wrote the answer. He wrote that it is known that a rabbit has 100 matches. Zhu Wen closed his eyes, continuing to hold the stick in his hands. The rabbit congratulated him, saying that he had earned 2 points. A total of 15 points could be earned in this task. The rabbit looked irritated and angry, but he still wished him a pleasant game. Pieces of Lu Meng's dress and her pendant lay on the snow. Zhu Wen pursed his lips and looked down. He realized that this was not a mathematical problem, but a logical one, in which he could get points even if he simply copied the question as a statement. He picked up the pendant and squeezed it in his fist. He told Lu Meng, who was no longer there, that if she disappeared so suddenly, her sister would want to find her in heaven. Someone was heading towards Zhu Wen. From a distance he saw an approaching crowd. The rabbit announced that the player had come into conflict with the locals. The town security service had received a complaint and was going to deal with the player in accordance with the law. Strange monsters appeared in front of Zhu Wen. Their skin was pale in color and their faces were long. Everyone's expressions were impudent and disgusting. The monster in the jacket and glasses said that they had received a complaint about a fight at the entrance to the city and asked Zhu Wen if he was the instigator of the fight. The guy shook his head and answered them negatively. The monster in the jacket pointed his finger at Zhu Wen and ordered him not to deny his guilt, because he was recorded on camera. He shouted that they have a peaceful town and they don't like strangers, like a guy, and every time they appear near their town, something happens. The monster said fighting was a serious offense and they would arrest him. Zhu Wen pointed his finger at the broken tree and said that this was not a fight, but a monster's victim. The bespectacled monster clenched his teeth and looked at him annoyed. With a mocking tone, he asked the guy if he was an expert on the laws. After a while, Zhu Wen was smiling at the camera, holding a sign with his name in his hands. They were doing a mugshot of the guy. The guy ended up in prison and looked at the monster through the bars. The monster with glasses was the warden. He wrote something down in his book and said that as a troublemaker, the guy was given administrative arrest for 5 days for petty hooliganism. Zhu Wen poked his head out of the bars a little and asked if he could ask him a question. The warden, with an irritated face, allowed him to ask a question. Zhu Wen said he saw a sign at the entrance to their town that said it was forbidden to leave without permission. He asked if it was illegal for a resident to leave the city. The warden sat with his back to him. Above his desk hung keys, a brush and a wire. He replied that not only residents were forbidden to leave the city, but also any visitor without the permission of the mayor. Otherwise it would be considered a crime and punishable by death. Zhu Wen asked with a slightly surprised face whether this crime was more serious than murder and arson. The warden began to bite his fountain pen and replied that murder and arson is nothing when the night comes, and he can kill people and eat their meat. The warden left his post, leaving Zhu Wen alone. The guy opened the inventory. A system window appeared. Name, scarf. Rarity, common. Effect, +2 resistance to cold. He chose a red scarf and then threw it between the planks on the ceiling. Zhu Wen grabbed his scarf, thinking of something. The image of him tying the scarf into a knot appeared on the big screen, like in a movie theater. There were many avatars with televisions instead of heads sitting in the chairs. They commented on what was happening on the screen, asking what he was up to. Someone even thought that the guy realized that the passage had become hopeless and he was giving up. Lu Meng's avatar activated, wearing the same headband as in the game. Facial expressions were schematically depicted on televisions. The avatar with the face of an old man stated the fact that she had woken up. Lu Meng immediately jumped up, started looking around the cinema and asked where she was. The old man, sitting in a chair, greeted the new girl and said that they were backstage. Lu Meng made a blank face and asked what it was. The old man turned around and pointed to the rest of the audience in the cinema, saying that this was the world of players whose accounts had been deleted. He said that this game has many observers, which they are. The old man turned to her and said that they could be considered the game's broadcast viewers. Lu Meng asked with a very confused face if this meant they were all dead. With a very sad face, the girl said that her sister would look for her everywhere. The old man told her not to worry and pointed his finger at the screen, asking her to look there. Lu Meng calmed down a little and looked at the broadcast. The old man told her that Zhu Wen took her pendant amulet with him. He wants to return it to her sister when they meet. Meanwhile, the guy tied the scarf into a knot and grabbed it. The audience decided that he wanted to leave the game in this way, refusing to believe it. Lu Meng looked at him in surprise and said his name. Zhu Wen grabbed his scarf and stood on the edge of his bed. The audience called the main character weak, asked what he wanted to do and who he was. Suddenly the guy pushed off the bed and flew forward. He put his foot forward and broke through the wooden wall, freeing himself from his confinement. The audience stared silently at the screen out of shock. Zhu Wen burst out. Monsters sat next to him and played cards. They paid attention to the guy. Spectators were surprised at his strength and believed that this was due to the fact that he was numbered. Zhu Wen looked towards the monsters without fear. The warden opened his mouth in surprise and dropped the playing cards from his hands. He and his friends immediately started yelling at the guy. Zhu Wen, meanwhile, had already begun to run away from them with an emotionless face. The spectators laughed and jokingly called him a robber. The warden's cries were heard among the snow-capped mountains. He asked where the guy had gone and ordered his henchmen to find him. There were still fresh footprints from the guy's shoes in the snow. Zhu Wen hid behind one of the houses, watching as the monsters looked for him in confusion around the area. The sun hit his pale skin as he peeked out from his hiding place. Footsteps were heard behind Zhu Wen. The main one immediately tensed up, distracted from his pursuers. He turned around with lightning speed and swung his fist. His blow should have overtaken the unknown person in a matter of seconds. When he saw that it was a teenage girl, his fist stopped. The girl was breathing heavily, her face turning red. The blow caused a gust of wind that began to blow the girl's cape through the air. She had bunny ears that went up sharply. The girl had gray hair and red eyes. She was very scared and looked at the fist in front of her face with tears. Zhu Wen looked at her in confusion, not understanding who was in front of him. The bunny girl was wearing a dress and also had a leather bag. She asked him in a whisper to be quiet and said that they couldn't let them notice them, because they eat people. Zhu Wen closed his eyes and sighed tiredly, covering his face with his windbreaker collar. The judge rabbit walked towards them, imitating the sound of a bell. The rabbit leaned over Zhu Wen and congratulated him for meeting the key character. Now the task will be completely unlocked. He began to tell the full version of the riddle. The white rabbit has 100 matches, and there are still 2 months of winter ahead. The villagers and the white rabbit need warmth, but the white rabbit has no home and is unlikely to survive the winter. Luckily, one of the villagers has a spare room in his house that he wants to rent out to the rabbit for 5,000 copper coins. The rabbit girl looked down sadly and embarrassed. The judge rabbit continued to talk about the problem. The white rabbit decided to sell matches to survive this winter. The price per match is 10 copper coins. The judge crossed his arms and looked down. He said that if the matches were in the hands of a player who knew how to negotiate, the matches could be sold at a higher price. Zhu Wen glanced at the girl who was clutching her dress and looking awkwardly at the guy. After completing the mission, the player will be able to safely exit the game. Completing this task is worth 12 points. Zhu Wen smiled and asked the girl if she was the rabbit from the match problem. The girl blushed and looked down, asking if he would help her find a home. She looked up at the guy and promised that in return he would be able to leave the village safely. The rabbit announced that the system had detected that the player was assigned the number 7, which means in love, and he was given a special condition to complete the task. The condition was that it was necessary to take the white rabbit on a date. For completing this task 600 points are given. Zhu Wen was silent for a while with a blank look and a slightly open mouth. Commentators were confused. Backstage, the old man adjusted his digital glasses and said that it was good to be young. Lu Meng puffed out her cheeks and asked if his glasses were real. The guy hit his palm with his fist. He smiled and said that now he understood. He asked where the matches were. Commentators were perplexed why he was asking about matches in such a situation. The girl reached into her bag to look for matches. With an innocent look, she held out one match and said that he was already wanted, and if he went to sell matches now, he would definitely be arrested. Commentators said that if they were in his place they would have done the same thing. Zhu Wen took the match and said with an insolent face that this was not enough. The girl with a smile on her face handed him another one. Zhu Wen asked for more matches. The girl was no longer smiling so widely, but still handed him the match. In the end, the guy puzzled her when he asked why she was so greedy. The girl began to get angry and puffed out her cheeks. She was offended and turned away from Zhu Wen, who had a bunch of matches in his hands. The guy smiled evilly, revealing his snow-white teeth. He took a bottle of gasoline out of his pocket and then poured it on the wooden walls of the houses. With a sly smile on his face, he struck a match. While the girl and the rabbit stood with their backs to the guy, he set fire to the wooden house. The offended girl drew a caricature of the dead Zhu Wen's face in the snow. Suddenly she and the rabbit turned towards a bright light. They saw Zhu Wen standing in the middle of burning houses. Against the background of the fire, the guy turned to them and smiled, saying that it was very beautiful. The girl, with a confused face, pointed her finger at the building and said that this was the best room that could be rented. After his affirmative answer, the girl said that he burned the house to the ground. The judge rabbit grabbed his ears angrily and said that the player had violated the village law regarding deliberate arson. The village security had received a report of what was happening and was going to deal with the players in accordance with the law. The warden and his assistant immediately ran up to Zhu Wen. The warden pointed his finger at the guy and asked if he had committed a crime and if he had forced the girl to do the same. The girl immediately began to nod actively, almost crying. Zhu Wen told her that she was lying. The judge rabbit lowered his head and turned away. The main character grabbed the girl by the ear and pointed a finger at himself. He said that he was the organizer, but the girl provided materials to commit the crime, so she is an accomplice. The girl looked up at him in confusion. The angry rabbit and the guard started shouting at the guy that he really knows the law well. The warden announced that for intentionally setting fire, Zhu Wen would be sentenced to 5 years in prison, and the girl who provided the criminal with the means to start the fire would be sentenced to 1 year in prison, effective immediately. Zhu Wen and the girl stood at the police station with signs with their names written on them. The guy smiled for a mugshot, and the girl could barely hold back her tears. They were locked in a prison cell with 6 locks on their door. The girl stood and looked at the locked door. She, crying, asked Zhu Wen where the house he had promised her was. The main character smiled slyly. He knocked on the wooden walls of the cell and said that they were in it. Zhu Wen looked at the rabbit judge and asked him what he thought about it. The very confused rabbit began to mumble words of congratulations, but as if he could not say it normally. Zhu Wen ordered him to stop mumbling. All the spectators behind the scenes were silent, shocked by his action. The rabbit congratulated Zhu Wen for providing the white rabbit with a place to hide from the wind and snow and spend the winter without any problems. The spectators looked at the screen with blank faces. Zhu Wen successfully passed this stage and received the right to continue participating in the game. Lu Meng jumped up from her seat and started jumping for joy. She was glad that the main character passed this stage. Zhu Wen stood against the wall, covering his face with his collar. The girl sat near the toilet and looked at him in disbelief. The counting of points received at this stage has begun. Zhu Wen fulfilled the requirement to complete the task with a reward of 12 points. 1 out of 12 plot clues received. An image of a key with the number of plot clues appeared. The stage was completed in 18 hours and 39 minutes. That's faster than 98% of players. Pass rank S additionally received 300 points. Zhu Wen received a special item, a rank a white rabbit blessing. It was a card with a pink-colored rabbit girl. A system window appeared, blessing of the white rabbit. Grants resistance to mortal wounds. Zhu Wen looked at the shiny card and scratched his head, repeating the properties of the item out loud. At this stage, Zhu Wen collected 20,091 spectators, which amounted to 200 points. In total, the main character received 1,700 points. The girl tugged at the sleeve of the guy's windbreaker. She looked at him pitifully. A blush appeared on her face. The girl asked if Zhu Wen would return to the village to play with her. The counting is completed. Zhu Wen will leave the game in 1 minute. He opened his inventory and asked the girl who would even want to return to this village. In 20 seconds he will already leave the game. The bunny girl looked at him again with her big eyes and asked if she could find him then so she could play with him later. Zhu Wen took one last look at her, when the process of moving to the real world had already begun. He closed his eyes and smiled, saying that if she really could, then he wouldn't mind playing. The countdown to leaving the game has begun. The girl smiled at him friendly, tilting her head slightly. She waved goodbye to the main character and shouted that they would see each other again. As soon as the countdown ended, Zhu Wen began to abruptly move into the real world. He was teleported to the city center. There were a lot of people around him. The sky was blue. The sun brightly illuminated the multi-story buildings. Zhu Wen picked up his phone and started calling Zhang Ling. He walked along the sidewalk and talked to her. Zhu Wen told her that he had left and asked about the other players. She answered him something, to which Zhu Wen asked if she still thought he passed quickly, and then said that she didn't want him to die there. The guy stopped in the middle of the street. He looked up and told Zhang Ling that he didn't find any significant clues in the beginner stage and he didn't know if he would find anything in the next ones. He told her he was almost there and disconnected the call. A strange inverted pyramid hovered in the sky above him. There were many colorful inscriptions on the pyramid in different languages. All the signs welcomed players to the game Heaven. 8 years ago, summer, a strange window in the sky appeared in the city, which attracted the attention of all people passing by. An error message window, similar to those that appear on a computer, appeared all over the world. Soon after, a pitch-black pyramid appeared in the sky. People covered their ears, trying to hide from the noise. 2 hours later, in all corners of the world, in different languages, a voice made an announcement. A system window appears, "Welcome to Heaven." The beta test will begin in 72 hours. Soon after, everyone realized that Heaven was indeed a game. A huge monster made of smoke stood among the fire. He made people explode by inflating their heads and other parts of their bodies. Real people will play this game. You cannot create another account. There is no revive button. There are also no walkthrough guides. Zhu Wen's hand was opening the lock on the door with a key. He had a diamond tattoo on his left wrist with the number 6 inside. Everyone who had a diamond tattoo and a number on their wrist became the players selected to play in the game. A game that no one has ever managed to beat. Zhu Wen pulled out the key from the lock and looked straight ahead in surprise. In front of him stood a beautiful girl with brown hair and brown eyes. She had a mole under her left eye. Her name was Zhang Ling. Zhu Wen closed his eyes and smiled faintly. A few minutes later he was already eating noodles and telling Zhang Ling how he was doing with the stage and the game. The girl sat opposite him and picked up dumplings with chopsticks. She asked if he was actually allowed to continue playing, even after using the NPC to set the building on fire. They sat at the kitchen table, having lunch together. Zhu Wen took a sip from his cup and replied that it was the result of the almighty rules of the game and the conditions for passing the stage contradicting each other, which led to an error. He said that due to game balance, the rules allowed players to destroy the environment to collect clues and escape. He added that at this stage there were law enforcement agencies, so the winter could be spent in prison. Zhang Ling, after eating the dumplings, asked if Zhu Wen thought that the white rabbit might be put in jail for a short time. Zhu Wen put on an innocent expression and replied lightheartedly that then he would help her escape from prison in order to accumulate crimes for a longer period. The girl sighed in disappointment and lowered her head. She said that the main thing is that Zhu Wen is okay. Zhu Wen agreed with her emotionlessly. He handed Zhang Ling the Lu Meng pendant and said that this was the only thing left of her. The main character asked the girl to give the pendant to her younger sister Lu Meng. Zhu Wen looked away and asked the girl to tell sister Lu Meng that he hoped she would live happily. Zhang Ling smiled softly and agreed. The guy started collecting dirty plates after lunch. Zhang Ling looked at him and stopped him. She asked if he took vodka from the wine cabinet and if he could drink it already. Zhu Wen slightly raised the corners of his lips. Then, with a happy smile, he took out his ID card and said that he became an adult last month. Zhang Ling put his hand to his cheek and asked if he was more happy about coming of age than about passing the first stage. The girl began to style her hair and told Zhu Wen that at the next stage he will have an employer, since he needs to replenish Echo's budget. The guy replied that he had just passed the stage for beginners. She began washing dishes with rubber gloves and told him that the employer had also recently completed the beginner stage, so he valued the guy much more than other players who had been earning points for many years, because the difficulty of the game increased with each stage. Zhang Ling and Zhu Wen washed the dirty dishes together. A new stage has begun. There were almost no leaves on the tree branches. A raven with red eyes watched menacingly with everyone, sitting on a tree. The raven's black feathers fell down to the ground. It was night, and in the middle of a dark forest stood a gloomy mansion. Zhu Wen woke up in this world after a while. He sat on the ground and watched the raven's feathers slowly fall down. The main character looked around. On his index finger was a ring with a red stone. He looked into the dark thicket of the forest, where nothing could be seen. A strange red substance appeared in the sky above the mansion. From this red material emerged a doll with a creepy smile, dressed in a red dress. She was the judge of this stage. Behind her was the Scarlet Moon. The doll greeted players to heaven. She looked down and announced that this was the standard level, average player score, 1067 points, number of participants, 7, game duration, 360 hours. The players standing at the gates of the mansion listened attentively but fearfully to the doll. It was announced that the introduction to the plot would begin in 5 minutes. Zhu Wen stood apart from the other players. His foot stumbled upon something strange among the fallen leaves. When he realized that he had discovered something scary, his eyes widened. The main character crouched down and grabbed the half-rotten hand of the corpse. Commentators and spectators were happy to see him. The guy didn't understand why he found only half of the body. The corpse was wearing a torn shirt and had long blonde hair. Commentators who saw this were disgusted. The doll attracted attention with the sounds of the bell. Her red eyes glowed brightly in the darkness. She announced a story update. It was that they were taken in by the director Ling. She is very strict with her 9 children. That is, the players. A girl with round glasses with dark hair and a guy in a formal suit listened attentively to the story. Director Ling ordered everyone to go shopping today, but they got carried away with the fun and were late. Among the players was a fashionable guy with an earring in his ear, a brutal man with a very short haircut, and a girl with dark hair and red eyes. Director Ling is very angry and demands an explanation. The introduction to the plot was revealed. Players were required to return home within 20 minutes. There was a terrible fog near the gates of the mansion. The doll watched everyone, floating in the air near the red moon. The mansion was truly huge. The doll curtsied and with a creepy smile announced that the countdown begins now. Zhu Wen, with a thoughtful face, wondered why there were 7 players, and manager Lin had 9 children. He remembered that there must still be an employer here somewhere. A piercing scream interrupted the main character's thoughts, and he turned his head towards the noise. Someone was forcibly dragging a girl with glasses and 2 braids on her head into the house. The rest of the players watched this from the side in shock. Someone's hand grabbed the girl's wrist and did not let go. It was Director Ling. She ordered the girl to follow her and asked why she was standing here and waiting for death. Ling looked like an elderly woman with a gray bun on her head and wore a monocle. She shouted that she told them that they had to return home before 10 p.m. The girl apologized to her and said that it was her fault and it would not happen again. She tried to break free from Director Ling's grip. She piteously begged someone to help her. Ling smiled slyly as she looked at the girl and said that she had broken the house rules, so she would be punished. The old woman dragged the girl into the house and slammed the door behind her. Director Ling peered out of the door crack eerily. The players tensed up and began to sweat with excitement. The girl tried to justify herself to the director that she got lost and that's why she returned so late. She screamed and asked for help. There was a knock. Zhu Wen looked towards the house without showing any emotion. He put his hand to his chin and wondered what the punishment was. The main character drew attention to his ring, which began to glow brightly. The ring, like a laser pointer, pointed into the thicket of the forest, where there was also a bright red light. Zhu Wen started to make his way through the bushes and saw a guy who curled up into a ball. On his hand he had the same ring as the main character. The frightened guy turned to Zhu Wen. He could barely hold back his tears. Zhu Wen extended his hand and introduced himself, saying that he was from the Echo Strategy team. The guy breathed out a sigh of relief, realizing that he was not in danger. He extended his hand to the main character and said that his name was Gu Suining and he was the employer. He had brown hair, blue eyes, and was wearing an orange t-shirt. The doll asked the players to return to the plot, since failure to arrive by the specified time is considered a refusal to play and leads to account deletion. Remaining time, 5 minutes. Gu Suining, who heard this, shuddered in fear and asked the main character what they should do. Zhu Wen remained calm. He closed his eyes and said that they had to go back, and since Ling wanted an explanation, they would give it. Gu Suining was surprised by his calmness. They approached the mansion. Gu Suining thought that the previous players' explanations were useless, and they would definitely lose if Zhu Wen was explained in the same way. Director Ling was already waiting for them outside the gate. The woman extended her flabby hand towards them and began talking about punishment for breaking the rules. Zhu Wen lowered his gaze and, calling her mom, sadly asked why she didn't meet them late in the evening. This question made both Director Ling and Gu Suining at a loss. The main character was feignedly offended and puffed out his cheeks, saying that it was so dark outside and they got lost in the forest. Gu Suining didn't know if it would work. He began to sweat from excitement. Zhu Wen said that there was someone's dead body on the side of the road, and he and Gu Suining were so scared that they couldn't move. Gu Suining and Ling didn't know how to answer him. The main character stood with his back to them. He turned his head to Ling with an innocent face and asked if she had stopped loving them. He assumed that she no longer wanted to look after them and decided to leave them. He faked a tearful cry that she didn't love them at all and probably didn't even consider them her children. Director Ling was embarrassed and confused by his words. She bashfully said that she considered them all her children. Zhu Wen hugged Gu Suining, who seemed petrified, and asked why she didn't meet them then. Because they were scared. He turned away from Ling and said that if she did not want to acknowledge them, then they would leave now. Director Ling put her hand on his shoulder and softened. She said that their mother, did not reject them and she was very worried about them while she was at home. Zhu Wen playfully wiped away the tears from his eyes and sniffled. Director Ling hugged them and told them not to be afraid, because he was already home, after which she called them to eat. She invited Gu Suining to the house too. She waited for the two of them to have dinner together. Gu Suining was confused and did not believe that it's actually working. They all entered the house together. The old woman told them to come in quickly, because it was cold outside. The rest of the players were already sitting at the table. Zhu Wen walked towards his seat with long strides, and Gu Suining nodded to her. All the players' attention was directed towards them. Gu Suining smiled awkwardly and waved at them. Director Ling hugged Zhu Wen and told him that she had prepared his favorite dish and asked him not to be angry. She promised that if he was late next time, his mother would definitely meet him. The main character crossed his arms over his chest and told her that she couldn't even imagine how scary it was in the forest at night. Ling began to calm him down and admitted that she had made a mistake. He, sitting at the table, snorted and turned away from her. All the players were simply shocked that she was treating him so softly. Gu Suining sat in disbelief. The old woman smiled and turned to the other players, saying that they would all have dinner and then go to bed. Zhu Wen stretched his shoulder with a smile on his face and encouraged everyone to eat as if they were at home. A gorgeous steak stood in front of him. Everyone looked at him in bewilderment. Commentators laughed and were surprised by Zhu Wen. While the main character was chewing the meat, he turned to Ling and asked her where the other two children were. She closed her eyes and sadly replied that his older sister was not feeling well and had already gone to bed, and his younger sister had just drunk milk and had also gone to bed. Zhu Wen looked at her suspiciously, thinking that Ling's lactation period had long passed, and on the outside there was not a single characteristic pleasant aroma inherent in natural milk. It was not homemade, which means that it must have been brought by a player. Director Ling said that their little sister slept a lot during the day, so she would probably wake up at night, and asked who would look after her. All the players lowered their heads in fear and remained silent. The old woman made an angry face and expected an answer from at least someone. Zhu Wen took the initiative and replied that he would look after it. He will continue to have dinner. Director Ling looked at him lovingly and called him a good child. She got up from the table and said that she would go and rest, and they could continue to eat. Zhu Wen agreed with her with his mouth full and continued to eat. A girl with short black hair tiredly raised her head up. A guy with an earring in his ear looked down sadly. Gu Suining picked at his plate and asked if the food here was edible. Zhu Wen told him that everything was fine, but the chicken was a little overcooked. The guy with the short hair looked at the trembling girl with pigtails. She looked down in fear and shook with fear. She was asked what the punishment Ling was talking about meant. A guy with a short haircut covered his face with his palms and replied that it's hard to say. This is just his fourth stage. According to his experience, if it's a normal punishment, it will be executed immediately. If it's a deadly punishment, a player might die tonight. These words scared the players and made them tense. Zhu Wen continued to eat the meat carefree. The girl with glasses, who was the first to be punished, raised her head in alarm. The light was on in the windows of the dining room, where all the players were sitting. After the guy's story, they sat in silence and fear. Zhu Wen was eating some snack and looking at the painting in the dark corridor. He thought that this is probably an exploration stage based on the clear conditions, and they will be convinced of this only after they meet their older sister or younger sister. He realized that since the little sister was still drinking milk, she must be about 1 or 2 years old. And if she was not on the first floor, then she was on the second floor. The main character climbed the stairs and looked at the paintings hanging on the wall. Gu Suining hurriedly followed him down the steps. He called out to Zhu Wen. The main character turned to him. Gu Suining looked at him pitifully and asked if he could stay by his side at night. Zhu Wen walked further up the stairs, chewing a sandwich. He allowed him, with the exception of going to the toilet and bath, and asked him to stay in sight more often, think more about what he was doing, and not get in the way. Gu Suining thanked him sincerely. The main character, with his mouth full, answered him that there was no need to thank him because he was paid for it. Gu Suining was embarrassed and agreed with him. Zhu Wen turned to him and said that in this business the rule is that the employer pays the full amount, and if he dies, he underpays. He shrugged and added that even if Gu Suining didn't survive, he would get his way. Gu Suining scratched his cheek and laughed in confusion. The corridor was richly decorated. The walls were decorated with gold stucco, and there were busts along the walls. The door to the younger sister's room creaked open. She was sleeping in her cradle. She looked like an ordinary baby. The younger sister was hugging a soft toy doll, and there were traces of blood on her lips. Gu Suining looked at her anxiously and asked in a whisper whether the milk that the younger sister was drinking could be blood. Zhu Wen dug into some things and answered him that this could be the case. He said that the bathroom and toilet here are separate and both are at the other end of the corridor, and asked if Gu Suining was going to take a shower. Gu Suining decided that Zhu Wen was very careful and was probably hinting to him not to make unnecessary movements and take unnecessary risks. He showed a refusal sign with his hands and replied that he would wash in the morning. Zhu Wen packed his things to go to the shower and said that then he would go and wash himself. This made Gu Suining stunned. He turned in confusion towards the slamming door and asked where is the caution that they talked about. Behind the large panoramic windows a white moon appeared, illuminating the bedroom. Gu Suining turned to Zhu Wen, who had already returned from the shower and was wearing a robe. The two of them looked at the baby and Gu Suining asked if she was really sleeping. The main character calmly began to shake the girls and tried to wake them up. Gu Suining was scared and shuddered at this unexpected action. Zhu Wen pointed his finger at the child and said that she probably wouldn't wake up anytime soon because she was sleeping very soundly. He suggested that we also go to bed since it was already late. Confused and anxious, Gu Suining sweated and scratched the back of his head, wondering if everything would really be okay. After a while they were fast asleep. Zhu Wen slept with his mouth open and took up most of the bed while Gu Suining huddled on the edge of the bed. A piercing cry for help was heard. Zhu Wen jumped out of bed and immediately realized that he had to go to help. He grabbed the still sleeping Gu Suining by the collar. The main character dragged him along, which is why he woke up and became confused. As he ran towards the scream, the rest of the players came out of the other bedrooms. Zhu Wen suddenly opened the door to the room where the scream was heard, and saw a guy with short hair lying on the floor with a grimace of horror on his face. Commentators discussed what could have happened there. The guy, trembling with fear, extended his hand to the main character and asked for help, because something under the bed grabbed his leg. He begged Zhu Wen to save him. A red, half-decomposed hand was dragging the guy under the bed. From there a pair of red eyes looked at him from the darkness. The main character immediately threw Gu Suining aside and reached out to the guy. The hopeful guy extended his hand back, expecting salvation. Tears of happiness appeared in his eyes as he pulled Zhu Wen's hand. But all this time the main character was not reaching for him, but for what was under the bed. Zhu Wen grabbed the red hand that was dragging the guy under the bed. He held her tightly and then a smirk appeared on his face. The guy in need of rescue looked at this and sweated with excitement. Zhu Wen tried his best to pull something out from under the bed with a smile on his face. He even propped his leg up on the bed while a pair of red eyes stared at him. The main character could hardly hold on to his decomposed hand and was shaking. The red eyes twitched, after which black liquid flowed from the half-decomposed hand. Because of this, it slipped out of Zhu Wen's hands. The limb quickly hid back under the bed. The main character looked in there with a thoughtful face. He tutted in annoyance when he discovered that something had escaped and that under the bed was empty. Zhu Wen looked at the black liquid flowing from his hands and felt disgusted. All the players gathered around him and looked in bewilderment. Gu Suining awkwardly scratched his cheek. Zhu Wen looked in his direction. The main character smiled and wiped the liquid on his shoulders, saying that the creature was gone and he could continue sleeping. Gu Suining looked at his clothes with disappointment. The rescued guy grabbed Zhu Wen's robe sleeve and tearfully thanked him and said that if he had not saved him, he would have been dead. Zhu Wen replied that it's nothing much. He looked at his hand and replied that this creature seemed familiar to him. He suggested that the others go back and rest. They still have 3 or 4 hours to sleep. Dark clouds covered the full moon. Zhu Wen and Gu Suining sat with blank looks and said that they didn't want to sleep now. All the other players stared at them with grins on their faces. The short-haired guy that Zhu Wen saved was named Wang Yuanqing. He asked Zhu Wen not to think about them and continue to sleep, because they just want to follow him. Gu Suining asked Zhu Wen what they would do next with an awkward face. The main character lowered his head and said that he understands everything, because this is a game and no one wants to die here. Also, the Echo Strategy Team's principle is to help other friendly players as much as possible while ensuring their own safety. Ju-Wen raised his finger up and offered to exchange information since they were awake. He had a few thoughts about the thing under the bed. The players stared at it in surprise and asked if anyone understood it just by touching, and what kind of creature it was. Ju-Wen asked the other players who were sitting around him to move away a little. He touched his wrist. The guy called for inventory. A blue circle appeared around the tattoo on his arm. This circle rose up and out of it fell the corpse that Ju-Wen had found earlier in the forest. The girl with glasses and Wang Yuanqing turned pale with fear and screamed. The other players covered their mouths in horror and asked what it was. Ju-Wen took Gu Suiting's t-shirt and placed it on the corpse's hand. He showed it to the other players and said that the smell, color and feeling from the touch were the same as that of that under the bed monster. Suddenly the corpse opened its eyes. He pounced on the players and opened his mouth wide. Ju-Wen raised his foot with lightning speed. He instantly stepped on the corpse and stopped it. The main character looked at the tattoo on his wrist and said that he found this corpse in the foliage outside. He thought it was interesting and he captured it. All the players stared at him with disapproving glances. Ju-Wen asked what happened to their faces and if they touched the corpses while they were playing the game. He decided to get back to the point. The protagonist raised his finger and said that the corpse he found and the body that Wang Yuanqing encountered were the same. Wang Yuanqing looked at him puzzled, sweat running down his face. Ju-Wen said that if there are already 2 corpses, there may be more, and if anyone wants, they can join him and go look around. Gu Suiting looked at him and firmly replied that he would go with him. Ju-Wen grinned sarcastically and said that he would definitely later, because he paid him. And even if he didn't want to, the main character would tie him up and take him with him. Gu Suiting laughed nervously. Wang Yuanqing walked up to him and said with a worried face that he remembered something. At the beginning, it was about breaking family rules, and the guy assumed that he was attacked because of this. That is, there is no collective punishment here, the victim is chosen at random. Ju-Wen nodded to him and said that they had discovered at least one condition for death. The man with glasses, the girl with short hair, and the girl with glasses looked sad and tense. Ju-Wen glanced at them. There was a luxurious gold chandelier with precious stones hanging in the corridor. The entire interior was made in the Baroque style. Ju-Wen suggested looking for clues since they couldn't sleep. He realized that when they disturbed the knight's peace, his mother did not come. At least night noise is not considered a violation of house rules. Some of the players thought that the main character so easily calls Ling his mother. They walked further down the corridor. There was a bust of someone and a painting on the mantelpiece. After that they went down the stairs. Ju-Wen stood in front of the wooden door, above which hung a chandelier in the shape of flowers. Gu Suiting stood behind him and leafed through the book. He said that he found several educational picture books, and assumed that they belonged to the younger sister. Ju-Wen agreed with him. Suddenly something caught Gu Suiting's attention and he looked away from his books. There was a hole in the door that was not covered by anything. Ju-Wen pointed at the surroundings and asked Gu Suiting if he thought it was too crowded. Gu Suiting didn't understand his question. The main character said that the estate looks huge, but inside everything does not match the size. The mansion really looked huge. There were at least 3 floors with many rooms. Ju-Wen looked at the door again and guessed that there was a large space behind it. Gu Suiting took a step forward, which surprised the protagonist. Gu Suiting took out his smartphone, turned on the flashlight and pointed it at the hole. He bent down there and looked into the hole. From there, an eye looked at him. Both the white and the pupil were red. Gu Suiting screamed loudly and jumped back, dropping the phone. He ran up to Ju-Wen and pointed his finger at the hole, saying in a trembling voice about the eye. Ju-Wen looked at the door emotionlessly without saying anything. He walked closer to it while Gu Suiting tried to dissuade him from looking there. Ju-Wen calmly looked into the hole. Within a second he poked his finger there. Blood began to flow from the hole and a slurping sound was heard. Something behind the door began to scream shrilly. Ju-Wen smiled and pulled his bloody finger out of the hole. He asked if her mother told her not to peek at others and said she now faced the consequences. Someone outside the door began to swear at the main character. Wang Yuanqing and the girl with glasses came running at the noise, asking what happened. Ju-Wen wiped his finger on Gu Suiting's jacket. The main character pointed a clean finger at the door and said that it was just a ghost. The rest of the players were stupefied by his composure and indifference. Ju-Wen realized that at this level, ghosts experience pain in a response to it. A judge doll appeared above the players and congratulated Ju-Wen on completing the hidden task of finding her sister. He received 200 points as a reward. All the players raised their heads up. The doll looked at them with a creepy face and smiled. She asked to continue working, wishing everyone a pleasant game. The male players looked at the doll tensely. The girls were slightly scared. Zhu Wen looked through the hole again and smiled, telling the girl sitting outside the door that she was indeed their elder sister, and introduced himself as her younger brother, asking for her forgiveness. The older sister started screaming and hitting the door out of anger. All the players were confused. Zhu Wen continued to look there and with a smile on his face asked if she was locked up, after which he suggested calling her mother and asking her to let her out. On the other side of the door, a girl with a red eye and long hair was looking at him. The main character turned his head and loudly called his mother. There was no response after that. Zhu Wen realized that the elder sister had fallen silent, and he thought about it. What if she didn't sleep, but actually did something and received punishment? If this is the case, then he now understands the food chain in this plot. The main character turned his back to the door and crossed his arms over his chest. He said that judging by the older sister's reaction, the mother is at the top of the hierarchy in this story, followed by the older sister and the players at the bottom. But since the younger sister has not yet woken up, not everything is completely clear. Dressed up and excited, Gu Suining asked him how he realized that Director Ling was more important than his elder sister. Zhu Wen pointed his finger at him and smiled, answering that it was thanks to logic and judgment testing. He told them to remember the plot. Director Ling is very strict with her 9 children, which means that the players and the elder sister are in an equal position. Zhu Wen suggested that the elder sister was punished because she pretended to be sick and supposedly went to bed, and she sneaked out into the street. Her lie meant fear of her mother. The girls listened to him attentively, without interrupting. Zhu Wen added that if the elder sister had a good relationship with her mother, she would not deceive her, because there would be no need to obey and lie. She would simply agree with her. Gu Suining clasped his hands together. His eyes seemed to sparkle, and he agreed with Zhu Wen. Wang Yuanqing looked at the calm protagonist and thought that he was only confident because of his strength. But he is not only strong in body, but also in mind. Zhu Wen raised his finger and asked the others if they had found anything up there. Wang Yuanqing smiled awkwardly and rubbed the back of his head, saying that they had not found a single clue. Zhu Wen thought it was strange that there was not a single guess, and there were no requirements to pass this stage. Outside, in the thicket of the forest, someone was standing in the darkness of the forest. Zhu Wen leaned against the door and pointed his finger at it. He said that they needed to understand why the sister disobeyed and went outside and what was hiding behind the door in the room. Gu Suining looked at him excitedly and asked if they would pass the level after knowing this. Zhu Wen told him that it was probably not that simple. He stood with his back to the other players and said that at dawn they would go and see how many more corpses were around, and perhaps they would find clues there. Zhu Wen understood that they had too little information and needed to check the second floor again. He walked towards the stairs with a calm face. The main character stopped and heard footsteps behind him. He turned around and with a slightly irritated face asked the other players why they were following him. The man with glasses coughed into his fist and replied that it was for safety reasons. The girls smiled at Zhu Wen and nodded, agreeing with the player. Zhu Wen sighed wearily, but did not forbid them to follow him. The sun had already begun to rise outside. Wang Yuanqing and the girl with glasses felt depressed. On the dining table lay a letter in an envelope with a wax seal. The girl with short hair looked confused and sad. Zhu Wen and Gu Suining sat down at the table where the letter lay. Zhu Wen had a piece of bread in his mouth. Gu Suining said that the elder sister is probably important in the plot and she will appear sooner or later. He asked the main character if he was afraid that she would go looking for him, because he still poked her in the eye. Zhu Wen, chewing bread, took the letter out of the envelope and said that judging by Director Ling's attitude towards him, and if they didn't trigger a death scenario, she wouldn't just ignore their safety. All the players crowded around Zhu Wen and began to read the letter from Ling. It said that she needed to go to the city for 10 days, and they needed to help her find the lost mask before the exhibition at the end of the month. In the end, she asked to obey her older sister. This sentence made all the players upset and disappointed in Zhu Wen's plan. The main character looked at the letter with a blank look. The commentators laughed at him. Zhu Wen hit Wang Yuanqing in the face with the letter and said that this was most likely one of the conditions for passing. Wang Yuanqing took the letter in his hands and scratched his head thoughtfully, saying that they had already searched the whole house and had not found any mask. Gu Suining frowned slightly and replied that Zhu Wen had told them the size of the mansion did not match the size of the rooms inside, and yesterday the elder sister was on the other side of the door, and perhaps the mask was there. He turned to Zhu Wen, who was squeezing jam onto his bread, and asked what they should do then. Zhu Wen continued eating bread and suggested having breakfast first. The players agreed with him and suggested following the main character's original plan, first scouting out what was outside. A raven flew over the players, its feathers falling down. The players walked with shovels along a forest path. Ju-Wen said that after entering the game, the corpses did not move, and when he told his mother about the corpse, she did not even think about it. She simply began to calm him down. Considering that they have to be home until a certain time and are forbidden to leave after it, Mom most likely knows about the corpses. The corpses themselves are active only at a certain time after sunset. Wang Yuanqing closed his eyes excitedly and said that this was encouraging. Ju-Wen stopped in the middle of the foliage. He raised his hand, signaling that the others should stop too. Gu Suining had a very serious face. Ju-Wen continued to remain calm before ordering everyone to begin. The players dispersed in different directions of the forest. They began to dig the ground with their shovels. The foliage bothered them a little, but they continued to work hard. Gu Suining was very focused on this. The girl in the red dress worked no less. Suddenly, a bloody pale hand was discovered among the foliage. The girl in the red dress covered her mouth in horror and said that she had found one corpse. The guy in the brown jacket shouted that he had found it too. Gu Suining sweated a little, but said that he had found 2 whole corpses. Half-decomposed heads of corpses lay in the foliage. Some corpses no longer even had skin and their skulls were visible. Wang Yuanqing tensed and began to pull one of the corpses out of the ground. They collected all the found corpses of varying degrees of decomposition in one place. Gu Suining glanced at them and asked if they could put them in inventory. Ju-Wen replied that there was not enough space because a third of the inventory was filled with several things, and there were more than 20 bodies, and this was probably not the end. He picked up the shovel again, pulling it out of the ground. The main character put his foot on the neck of the corpse and swung a shovel, offering to separate all their limbs and heads from their bodies, thoroughly dismantling them. Wang Yuanqing turned pale with fear and wiped the sweat from his face. He asked if it was too cruel and if they did it, would they get in trouble. While Ju-Wen was preparing to cut up the bodies, Gu Suining turned to Wang Yuanqing and told him that everything would be fine, because if they dismembered them piece by piece, the corpses would become helpless and useless, and they would not be able to reach them. Gu Suining came to the realization that he began to think even like Ju-Wen, not understanding what kind of mental corruption is this. Ju-Wen agreed with the guy's statement and nodded, saying that this is exactly what he meant. He turned his head to the other players and said that they should not feel guilty, since the corpses are no longer people. With one blow of the shovel, he tore off the head of the corpse. The man adjusted his glasses. Gu Suining looked at Ju-Wen seriously, and Wang Yuanqing resigned himself and said that either they would dismember the corpses or they themselves would die. The girls and the guy realized that he was right and were also ready to get down to business. All the players began to open the limbs and heads of the corpses with shovels. Commentators looked at heads and legs with arms flying in all directions. They were glad that at least someone was able to persecute the game. Some girl found herself next to the players and corpses. She was wearing a long black dress with lace at the neckline. She had long black hair with green streaks. Ju-Wen was focused on his business. With one swing of the shovel, he tore off the head of another corpse. After the blow, he noticed a mysterious girl and drew attention to her. She had a black patch over her right eye and her other eye was green. She looked at Ju-Wen with displeasure. The girl frowned and angrily asked what they were doing. Gu Suining turned pale and stopped abruptly. He noticed the eye patch and realized that it was his older sister. Ju-Wen smiled widely. He slung the shovel over his shoulder and waved it, wishing his sister good morning. The older sister bit her lower lip and made a displeased face. Several system windows appeared. Individual task. An additional outcome has been revealed for player number 6. The older sister sits at home all the time in the outback, because her mother does not let her go anywhere. While her peers found a loved one and lived happily ever after, only she vegetates at home alone due to her mother's strict rules. She also wanted a normal life, but she only got to experience it for a short time. Special conditions for passing have been determined due to the fact that the level is multi-user. If player number 6 completes the level according to the individual task, the completion of the level will be credited to all players. For this he will receive 800 points, and other players will receive 200 points. Ju-Wen read that he would only be given 800 points, which was negligible for him. His face looked disappointed. He looked at his older sister and thought that women were doing nothing but preventing him from getting points. The older sister crossed her arms and angrily asked why they were all outside, because if the younger sister woke up alone, she would start crying. She looked at all the players. Everyone except Ju-Wen looked scared and worried. The elder sister said that the opening of the exhibition would be soon and the exhibition hall needed to be put in order as soon as possible, so she would choose one of them to sit with the younger sister, and the rest would clean up. She pointed her finger at the girl in the red dress. The girl was very scared. She was told to take care of her little sister, causing her to shed tears of fear and horror. She immediately ran to Zhu Wen and hugged him, desperately asking him to save him. The girl cried, clinging to the main character, and said that she did not want to be alone with this creature, even if she was a baby. Zhu Wen closed his eyes and smiled calmly. He leaned over to the girl and gently reassured her, after which he said that the exhibition hall was most likely the place where the sister was locked up yesterday, and if you think about it, the level should be small. From such a gesture, the girl immediately calmed down. She looked at his face, and her cheeks turned red. Zhu Wen moved even closer to the girl's face and told her to run away and call them in case of danger. The girl blushed very much, but she listened to his words. She didn't worry so much anymore. Gu Suining called Zhu Wen over and suggested that he use the weapon while he had it, and get rid of his elder sister. The main character told him not to be stupid, because in the letter to his mother it was clearly told to obey his older sister. The elder sister frowned and looked at the players angrily. Zhu Wen told Gu Suining that they shouldn't even try to get rid of her, just to see what would happen if they didn't listen to her. The main character smiled, his eyes narrowing slightly. He came very close to the embittered sister and asked to take them to the exhibition hall. The players found themselves in the exhibition hall. The paintings on the walls and the walls themselves were stained with blood. The players looked around. The display cases in the hall were also dirty, and there were blood stains on the floor. The elder sister passed by Zhu Wen and said that the exhibition starts at the end of the month, and they need to hurry up and clean up. She stood with her back to the players and said that they should not break anything, otherwise they would sit locked up alone all night. The sister left and slammed the door behind her. Wang Yuanqing got angry and shouted why she left without giving them any rags or water, because they came here to clean up. Gu Suining crossed his arms and smiled, asking if he was really going to leave since they needed to find a mask. Wang Yuanqing laughed awkwardly and replied that he was too engrossed in plot. Zhu Wen lowered his head. He remembered there was a bucket in the bathroom, a pile of new rags in the kitchen, and a faucet outside, but he wasn't sure how functional it was. The exhibition hall does not have a door connecting it to the corridors, which means that there is something between the exhibition hall and the residential part. The sun outside shone brightly on the house, the green leaves on the trees rustled. Zhu Wen turned to the other players and told them to stay here while he went and got something. Wang Yuanqing fearfully asked if his sister would tell him that he had broken the rules because of what he found. Zhu Wen hugged Gu Suining and told him to stay here too. The main character said that if their older sister comes to them, then let them just tell her the truth, because they did not break any rules. The game will not kill them for nothing. Dark clouds appeared outside the window. A girl in a red dress sat opposite her younger sister's cradle and, sobbing, read her a book. The younger sister sat in her crib and smiled terribly with sharp teeth. She had huge red eyes. The doll she had slept with the previous night was torn apart and gutted. The door to the room began to open. Zhu Wen stood behind it and looked calm. The girl in the red dress turned pale and ran towards the main character. She grabbed his windbreaker and said in a trembling voice that she, as Zhu Wen had advised, read her children's stories with pictures, and the sister calmed down a little. But as soon as the girl stopped reading, the baby began to scream again. Zhu Wen looked towards his younger sister emotionlessly. His gaze was cold. The baby climbed out of his cradle and stood, casting an eerie shadow. She began to frown, while smiling and showing her sharp teeth. The veins on her face were bulging and her eyes glowed an ominous red. The baby on all fours ran madly towards Zhu Wen and the girl. The child opened his mouth wide and was already preparing to devour one of the players. The girl screamed and clung to Zhu Wen even tighter in panic. The main character began to swing his leg. He threw the girl aside and stopped the baby in mid-air with his foot. The child flew straight into the open doorway. Black-green hair flew through the air. The black-gloved hand reached forward. It was the older sister. She managed to catch the youngest before she fell. The eldest sister turned to Zhu Wen angrily and asked if he really treated the child this way, and if he had spoken yesterday about respect for elders and love for younger ones, and if he didn't think he had done something wrong in such a case. The main character looked at her with a slightly confused look. He understood that violation of family rules and offenses are something serious, and the punishment mechanism can be activated. Zhu Wen put on an innocent face and put his hands to his cheeks, after which he objected to the elder sister that yesterday's Zhu Wen said this, not the current one, and it would be more correct to discuss this issue with the current one, not yesterday. He added that the one who kicked their little sister is Zhu Wen from a minute ago. It's not him at the moment. Zhu Wen continued to puzzle the elder sister for a while. Her face looked confused and she lost the point of the conversation. She became angry, as did her little sister in her arms, and asked why she had not noticed before that his mouth was really smooth and nimble. Zhu Wen feigned shyness and asked him to stop praising him, saying that his ego would inflate. He hugged the girl in the red dress and headed towards the exit with her, saying that since the older sister had come to look after the younger one, they would go to clean the exhibition hall. The older sister angrily shouted his name after him. He returned to the showroom. The players counted the display cases. There were 108 of them. They said that luckily the floor was made of wood and the display cases were heavy, so the floor showed signs of how they had stood. The display cases themselves were made of glass. The bottom was black and the top was transparent. Gu Suining approached Zhu Wen and told him that they were moving several display cases, and it turned out that there were fewer of them here before. The distance between them was greater. Zhu Wen turned to the other players and said that he had checked the faucet outside and it was working, so he suggested they start cleaning. He recalled that his mother told him to obey his older sister. The players began cleaning up. Someone was carefully mopping the floors. Gu Suining wiped the dirty and dusty display cases with rags. The girl in the red dress turned her attention to Zhu Wen. She walked up to him and apologized guiltily for the fact that he had to do this to his little sister because of her. She asked what if the elder sister wants to take revenge on him. He closed his eyes and convinced the girl that it was not her fault because he knocked out his sister's eye, so sooner or later she would have taken revenge on him. A sweaty Wang Yuanqing asked Zhu Wen why he didn't do anything because he might get into trouble. Zhu Wen told him that last night he knocked out his older sister's eye and recently kicked his younger sister several meters away. And now he wants to see what happens next if he does something wrong again. The players listened to all this with misunderstanding and confusion. The main character raised his head and noticed something. There was a key lying on a wooden beam near the ceiling. Zhu Wen jumped there and took it out. After that, he landed gently on the floor. The main character looked at the key and realized that there were no locks nearby, as well as doors in the exhibition hall, which confirms the idea that there is something hidden between the living area and the exhibition hall. He looked at the clock hanging on the wall. The hands on the clock showed 9:55 p.m. Zhu Wen said that it was almost 10 p.m. and suggested everyone to rest so as not to break any rules. All the players agreed with him. A huge white moon illuminated the forest near the mansion. A strange voice was heard asking something. Gu Suining was sleeping, a trickle of blood flowing down his temple. He woke up and rubbed his eyes, thinking that the speaker was Zhu Wen. In front of the guy stood a revived, withered corpse. The corpse said he knew it was him because he could smell him. Worms and maggots appeared from the empty eye sockets of the corpse. Gu Suining was very frightened and panicked. The corpse began to attack the guy, and he tried to fight it off, shouting Chinese spells to drive out evil spirits. Zhu Wen, who heard the noise, also woke up. He jumped up sharply and hit the corpse on the head. The main character was able to help Gu Suining while saying a phrase from the famous anime. Zhu Wen clicked on the tattoo on his wrist, and the corpse went into inventory. Gu Suining smiled awkwardly and said that he had never been so brave before. Zhu Wen stood in front of him and asked why he was trembling then. Gu Suining replied that everything was fine. He just really wanted to go to the toilet. Zhu Wen looked at the girls and said that it was strange that they did not wake up from such noise. Gu Suining walked up to him and replied that he had also been sleepy all day. He was so scared yesterday that he couldn't sleep, but today he fell into a deep sleep very easily. Somewhere in the distance a glass of water broke. Gu Suining and Zhu Wen turned sharply towards the noise. After this, a cry for help was heard. A guy in a white shirt, who usually wore glasses, was lying on the floor, shaking. He clutched his stomach. Zhu Wen lifted his shirt and found a bleeding wound there. He tried to calm the guy down and said that it only looked scary. After that, he placed a glass under the guy's wound, where he collected his blood. The guy asked why Zhu Wen needed his blood. The scarlet blood in the glass looked creepy. Zhu Wen replied that the milk that the little sister wants may turn out to be blood, so they should not waste it. The players looked at him with disgust. The guy from whom the blood was taken turned pale and seemed to have dried up. Wang Yuanqing said that thanks to Zhu Wen, they learned that corpses could be stored in inventory. Otherwise, the recent attack would have ended badly for them. Gu Suining agreed with him, nodding. Wang Yuanqing made a thoughtful face and asked if the younger sister could also be put in the inventory. The guy in the black t-shirt closed his eyes, and Gu Suining made a slightly disappointed face and mentally asked what comedy group is this. Zhu Wen looked at the players and replied that it wouldn't work. He had already tried. Everyone looked at him in surprise and asked when he had time. He replied that it was last night. Gu Suining suddenly realized that this was precisely why he shook the baby while she was sleeping. Then Zhu Wen received a system error window. He answered in the affirmative and said that he had tried to do it on his older sister this morning. Then the same error window appeared. The girl in the dress remembered that it was when he asked her to take them to the exhibition hall. Zhu Wen decided to draw conclusions. Inanimate items can be moved to inventory because he tried moving several items and it didn't work. These were plates, glasses, a book. And even if zombies can move at night, they are still dead people, that is, inanimate objects. Both sisters are alive, so this won't work on them. He remembered how they looked at him terribly. Gu Suining smiled enthusiastically, saying that he understood everything now. Zhu Wen told him that he tried and put it in inventory yesterday. Gu Suining immediately stopped smiling and asked if he should have asked permission to do this. Zhu Wen crossed his arms and said that he tried to move the beetles from the corpses they found in the morning into his inventory. But he failed, so living items definitely cannot be put into inventory. Zhu Wen raised his finger and said that yesterday they entered the game at 9:55 p.m. They were given 5 minutes to enter, which means someone deliberately limited them. He remembered the face of that creepy doll and visualized a clock in his head. Gu Suining raised his hand and said that he understood everything. He suggested that the dead had been active since 10:20 p.m., and if they had not made it in time, they would have been killed, so their accounts would have been deleted anyway. Zhu Wen smiled at him and gave him a thumbs up. The guy in the black t-shirt said that they were forced to choose between death and deleting their account. It was like this game wanted to kill them. The guy with the wound on his stomach was exhausted, but he still bandaged the wound. Zhu Wen looked into the glass of blood. The girl with black hair asked if this meant it was not safe to go out at night. The guy with the wound on his stomach put on his glasses and asked if they should sleep during the day so they could be alert at night. Wang Yuanqing tensed and replied that they would have to deal with the sisters during the day, they would be trapped anyway. Zhu Wen put his hands in his pockets and said that this is just a hypothesis and has no real proof. Gu Suining looked at him excitedly and asked how they should prove it. The main character snatched the hoe from his hands. He jumped out of the window and said that we should at least try. The main character landed neatly on the ground. From the thicket of the forest, many red eyes looked at him. A hand from the forest grabbed the nearest tree. Zhu Wen grabbed the hoe tighter. He threw it over his shoulder and looked at the dark forest, which was infested with zombies. A crowd of dead people began to head towards the guy. Gu Suining leaned out of the window and shouted to him to come back quickly. Zhu Wen smiled excitedly. The main character ran straight into the crowd of corpses. Some of the dead wore capes and smiled. Zhu Wen jumped up and swung his hoe at them. The players watching him from home were very worried about him. One of the dead began to scream loudly. Zhu Wen cut off his head with one swing of his instrument. He crushed one zombie after another with lightning speed. The main character was very focused and was not distracted by anything. Crowds of zombies were left headless and falling dead after Zhu Wen's attack. His refined movements did not give the corpses a chance to survive. He crushed them without fear. One of the severed heads hit another zombie in the head, and he began to mutter something unintelligible. Zhu Wen again threw the hoe over his shoulder and went to finish off the surviving zombies. A horde of corpses fled in fear away from him. Commentators laughed at the zombies and said that it was like they saw the devil. Gu Suining watched from the window as Zhu Wen dealt with the corpses. Wang Yuanqing exhaled warm steam from his mouth and asked him if he had anything to say to this. Gu Suining told him with an emotionless face that he was already used to it. Half an hour passed. All of Zhu Wen's clothes were dirty. He stood in front of a beautifully painted door. He opened the doors and showed himself to the rest of the players. Gu Suining looked at the players who began to back away and asked what's wrong. Zhu Wen lowered his hoe to the floor with some dirty box under his arm. He said that zombies are really active during this time period. He showed the others a box with a golden key on it and said that he accidentally kicked it while he was chasing a zombie. The main character gave the box to Gu Suining and said that all the corpses were moving from the same direction, and they were obviously guarding something. He asked Gu Suining to see what was there while he took a shower. Gu Suining agreed. After a while, Zhu Wen came out of the shower wearing slippers and a robe. He began to dry his hair with a towel. The man with glasses crossed his arms and asked why they attacked him and Gu Suining, since they were all doing the same thing today. Gu Suining thoughtfully agreed with him, since they didn't break any rules, and suggested that the punishments were given out randomly. Zhu Wen, who was wiping his hair, told them that the others were washing the walls and floor, and only they were wiping down the display cases. Wang Yuanqing got angry and punched the wall. He was annoyed that they either broke the rules and disobeyed their sister, or they obeyed her and pissed off the zombies. He said that Heaven himself spoke about logical correctness, but did not understand how the creators allowed this contradiction. Zhu Wen raised his finger up and tried to calm him down, because their situation has a justification. Since the monsters here feel pain and fear, even an ordinary person has a chance to fight back. He looked at the box and asked if the key matched it. Gu Suining lowered his gaze in frustration and told him that there was no way they could open it. The main character took the box in his hands and easily broke it in half. The players looked at him in shock and thought that he made them look weak. Wang Yuanqing anxiously asked if Zhu Wen was afraid that the zombies would be angry about this. Zhu Wen dropped the wood chips from the box and said that it was important to open the box, not the way he did it. He argued that zombies wouldn't attack him simply for doing his duty, so he shouldn't underestimate them. Gu Suining thought that he was talking about zombies as if they were his distant relatives. A piece of paper with an obituary written on it fell out of the box. Zhu Wen picked it up and began to read. At the bottom of the page it was written that if you don't follow the rules, you leave. Gu Suining approached the main character and asked who was leaving. Zhu Wen turned to him and said that he walked around the estate and realized that the zombies could not get closer than 5 meters to him. That is, if they did not touch the display cases, the dead would not bother them. Gu Suining took the piece of paper in his hands and said that if they do not touch the display cases, they will not be able to wash them. That is, they will disobey the elder sister, given the fact that on the first day they broke the rules and a corpse came for them. All the players thought and did not know what to do. Zhu Wen headed towards the exit and finally said that the reasons may be different, but the result is the same. He suggested everyone go to bed. All the players simultaneously thought that only Zhu Wen could sleep in such a situation. Morning came. The sun's rays made their way through the dense foliage of the trees. Zhu Wen woke up in the big bed while the players crowded around his little sister's cradle. They shouted that she really needed to be fed blood. The baby grabbed the glass of blood and drank it greedily. She raised her head to drink every last drop. After that, she immediately fell on her back to the relieved sighs of the players. The younger sister fell fast asleep after drinking the blood. Zhu Wen walked over to the rest of the players as Gu Suining said that at least they were done with this. The main character suggested going to the exhibition hall and looking for clues, since the youngest had calmed down. They came to the exhibition hall. The room was filled with dirty display cases. While Gu Suining was washing something caught his attention. Under the display case lay some scrap of fabric or something similar. Gu Suining pointed his finger at it and asked Zhu Wen to help him pull it out. Wang Yuanqing and Gu Suining held and lifted the display case, and Zhu Wen pulled out this flap from under it. He took out a strange piece of paper and looked at it in surprise. Zhu Wen showed Gu Suining's thing. It was quite dirty. The main character touched Gu Suining's cheeks, which made the guy puzzled. Zhu Wen looked at the flap again and realized that it was old human skin. Gu Suining, who was still being held by Zhu Wen's cheek, asked in surprise what he meant. The girl with glasses suddenly squealed in fear, attracting everyone's attention. On one of the display cases lay a mask of a man's face. It was dirty and slightly cracked. Wang Yuanqing looked at it and said that Mom asked them to find a mask. Gu Suining told him that perhaps this was the mask they were looking for. The girl with glasses looked at Zhu Wen embarrassedly and asked if they should clean this display case. Zhu Wen frowned slightly and made a serious face. He answered her in the affirmative. Wang Yuanqing grabbed the rag and said with a scared face that they should start cleaning then, because even if they didn't clean up, they would still have problems. All the players gathered together. Zhu Wen decided to divide the responsibilities between all the players. There were 108 display cases. They couldn't handle everything in one day, so he suggested that everyone wash 10 display cases. There really were a lot of display cases. They stood close to each other. Everyone shouted that they would do what Zhu Wen told them. Wang Yuanqing carefully wiped the display cases with a damp cloth. Sweat appeared on his face. Gu Suining was very focused on cleaning, trying not to miss a single spot. The girl in the red dress was scared. There were tears in her eyes, but she still wiped the display cases. Gu Suining wiped his 10 display cases and raised his head, breathing fresh air into his lungs. He sat down tiredly on the floor, drops of sweat falling from his face. He turned his head, noticing something strange. His eyebrows rose in surprise. He saw many nearby windows sparkling with cleanliness, not understanding how this was possible, because according to calculations there were 10 windows per person. Zhu Wen walked up to him with a rag in his hands and said that he was bored, so he washed the rest. Gu Suining was shocked by his answer, because the main character, in his opinion, was the best at cleaning windows. Wang Yuanqing said with a tense face that although they had finished, it was too scary. He pointed to rows of display cases, each containing masks. A thought occurred to Gu Suining. He looked at the display case and told Zhu Wen that if he was not mistaken, then all the zombies they dug up yesterday had no faces. That is, these masks were cut from the faces of the dead. They really looked very naturalistic. Zhu Wen was calm as usual. All the other players were scared by this thing. Wang Yuanqing shook with fear and turned pale. He said that they were not washing the exhibition room, but the faces of those outside. The guy with black hair looked at him in fear and asked if he could not scare them with this. Wang Yuanqing told him that he did not want to scare anyone, but now he understands why the corpses were so angry at them, because he himself would not want anyone to wash his face. Zhu Wen tapped his fingers on the glass display case. He looked at the display case, placing his hand on it, and said that this display case was empty, and the mask that Ling asked to find should be here. He looked closer and saw that there was some piece of paper under the glass. Gu Suining frowned and asked uncertainly if this is where the key that Zhu Wen gave him yesterday was inserted. The main character didn't even listen to him and broke the window with his elbow. Gu Suining stood with a blank face. After that, he smiled awkwardly and asked if Zhu Wen was acting too aggressively. Zhu Wen agreed with him with a calm face, saying that it was a little aggressive. The other players looked at him in shock. Zhu Wen took out a piece of paper from the display case and said that he pierced the elder sister's eye and kicked the younger sister. He asked why no one had attacked him yet, since he was the one who had broken more rules. The players wondered why he looked so disappointed. Zhu Wen read what was written on the piece of paper. It said that they would guard, supervise, and continue. The players did not understand who this note was talking about. The elder sister entered the exhibition hall. She began to slowly walk towards the players and asked Zhu Wen why he was so naughty. She lowered her head slightly and it was clear that she was angry. The sister said that their mother clearly ordered them to obey and carefully clean the exhibition hall, and breaking a display case is a serious offense. Zhu Wen feigned guilt and put his hands on his back and made a sad face. He replied that only after committing a crime could he see her, because he missed her. He added that it was all the older sister's fault. Wang Yuanqing said with a blank face that it seemed to him that Zhu Wen was trying to hook up sister. Gu Suining, with the same blank face, replied that he was not sure, but suggested looking further. The older sister raised her head and took a deep breath. She made a creepy expression on her face and said that since Zhu Wen did something wrong, sister can only lock him up forever to keep him by sister's side. The main character imagined himself surrounded by flames that came from a fiery skull. Zhu Wen suddenly opened his eyes. He looked worried. He woke up in a small closet, his whole face covered with sweat. He looked ahead and saw a boarded-up door. Looking closer, he saw a hole in the door. Zhu Wen calmed down a little and smiled when he realized where he was. Yesterday, not long before, Zhu Wen threw the golden key into the air. Gu Suining, Wang Yuanqing, and the girl in the dress looked at the main character sadly. They were all sitting on the floor. Zhu Wen threw the key up again and said that it fits all display cases, which means it is universal. He said that tomorrow he would open all the windows and see if there were clues there. Wang Yuanqing raised his head up, looking at the key, and said that his sister's words were definitely death threats, and perhaps he would die at night. Gu Suining suddenly stood up and clenched his fist. He shouted that he won't let anything happen to Zhu Wen. The guy frowned and looked down. He suggested that we take turns on duty today, and if there is any threat, they will immediately make a fuss. All the players stood up and supported his idea. Wang Yuanqing said that this makes sense, and either they get rid of the corpses or the corpses from them. The girl with glasses said that yesterday she saw a rope in the storeroom, and suggested that everyone wrap it around themselves, and if someone is dragged away at night, they will notice it. The girl in the red dress agreed with her and said that the rope was quite long, and even if they wrapped it around it, it would not limit their movement. Zhu Wen closed his eyes and lowered his head, saying that it works. Zhu Wen was measuring and counting something with his fingers. The commentators looked at Zhu Wen doing this and mocked him. The protagonist again looked around the closet in which he was locked and asked if this was a punishment for a serious offense. He measured that the width of the room was 4 handsbreadths, but the height was quite extensive. Zhu Wen noticed the light that came from the hole on the door. He realized that this was the place where the elder sister had been locked before. Zhu Wen tried to stretch his arms forward, but the room was too narrow. Commentators speculated about how he would get out of there. The main character realized that this room reminded him of a kind of guardhouse, and if he was serving his sentence here, it meant that his sister was also here for some kind of violation. It was a rather narrow place. You couldn't even straighten your legs and arms. He pressed his palm against the concrete wall. As he did this, an idea came to his mind. Zhu Wen frowned and tensed. He leaned harder against the wall. His hand began to tremble. The main character jumped up sharply. He kicked the concrete wall so hard it left a dent. He looked at the cracked wall and realized that the walls here were quite thick. Zhu Wen landed on one knee after being hit. Commentators marveled at his strength. He looked forward intently. After that, the guy plopped down on the floor. He started just sitting on the floor while the commentators were perplexed. Zhu Wen closed his eyes and realized that the space here was quite narrow. The game was designed in such a way that such simple deaths would not happen here, which means this place should correct Zhu Wen and break his resistance to the rules. Zhu Wen hit the wall with the back of his hand. The commentators did not understand where his teammates were. Zhu Wen lowered his eyebrows and decided to just wait. At this time, the rest of the players, tied with rope, were sleeping peacefully on the floor. Suddenly, Gu Suining suddenly opened his eyes, waking up. He looked at the knot of the rope where Zhu Wen should have been and was horrified to realize that he was not there. Gu Suining abruptly stood up and ordered everyone to wake up. His face was angry. He shouted that Zhu Wen was missing and needed to be rescued. Someone grabbed his sleeve with their hands. It was a man in a shirt. He looked pitifully at Gu Suining and shouted that even Zhu Wen was missing, and it was too scary, and if they went to look for him, they would definitely die. The guy in the black sweater desperately grabbed his head and began to panic that they would all die. He didn't want to play this game anymore. Gu Suining became even more angry. He clenched his fists and shouted that Zhu Wen was not dead. The man in the shirt looked up doomedly and began to shake with fear. He said that Zhu Wen disappeared without a sound. An ordinary person could not do this. He didn't understand who they were fighting against. The girls lowered their heads in horror and trembled with fear. Gu Suining walked up to him and slapped him. He gritted his teeth and looked at the man angrily, saying that everything depended only on them and they had to figure it out, and his whining would not help anything. Wang Yuanqing and Gu Suining looked at the rest of the players, who were cowering and sitting on the floor, trembling in fear. Wang Yuanqing became angry and shouted loudly to them that if they were afraid, they could continue to hide, but they would not last long. He broke the rope and shouted that Zhu Wen saved his life and so he would go look for him. He ran out into the corridor. Gu Suining followed him out and asked him to wait. Wang Yuanqing stopped abruptly, confused, while Gu Suining was catching up with him. Wang Yuanqing blocked his path, stopping at the edge of the floor. Gu Suining asked why he was just standing there. Wang Yuanqing ordered him not to approach. He looked doomed and scared. A horde of the dead was waiting for them below, aggressively moving forward. Zombies scratched the walls, looking for someone. They realized that they were moving in the right direction. The zombies were on the first floor. On the second floor, Gu Suining and Wang Yuanqing were watching them and did not understand what they were looking for. Wang Yuanqing grabbed the edge of the fence and asked where the knocking sound was coming from. Suddenly, one of the walls collapsed. A hole appeared in the wall, from which Zhu Wen's leg appeared. Shocked, Gu Suining and Wang Yuanqing did not understand what was happening. Zhu Wen's head poked out of the hole, which the zombies paid attention to. The main character calmly looked at the dead and ordered to give him a hand. The zombies realized that this was the one they needed, and immediately ran towards him. Zhu Wen hid back in the closet while the zombies tried to squeeze into the hole he had made. Zhu Wen watched this and encouraged them to continue doing so. He smiled slyly and said that they were almost finished. The hole became large enough for a person to crawl through. The zombies reached for Zhu Wen's feet. The guy put his foot on the face of one of the zombies. With one blow he took off his head, after which the main character calmly climbed out. Confused, Gu Suining and Wang Yuanqing did not understand how he did it. One of the zombies jumped on top of Zhu Wen. The guy was not taken aback and deftly dodged the attack. As he jumped, he hit the zombie in the face, knocking out its teeth. He threw the zombie away, causing the dead man to knock the other zombies off their feet. Zhu Wen began to stretch his shoulders, saying that he could use a warm-up. The zombies looked at the guy in fear and confusion. The main character put his hands together and said that he would start with them. Gu Suining called out to him from the balcony. He threw him a hoe, which began to fly quickly towards Zhu Wen. The main character deftly caught the instrument with one hand. He thanked him and then started swinging with a creepy smile on his face. The zombies were even more frightened when they saw the familiar smile and weapon. One of the zombies ordered the others to stop because this man had crushed many of them yesterday. They began to back away in fear. Zhu Wen jumped at them with an evil smile, swinging his weapon. Gu Suining and Wang Yuanqing sat down on the floor. The shaved man said that he thinks Zhu Wen is doing this on purpose. Gu Suining looked at him and agreed with him. He also thought that Zhu Wen was deliberately breaking the rules, just like the display case. He understood that the fastest way to find passage conditions was lethal conditions. He imagined Zhu Wen running headlong through mortal danger while the rest of the players carefully moved through the story. Wang Yuanqing put his hand on his chin and said that by avoiding collisions, the passage time will increase significantly, and Zhu Wen will speed up the process, but it is too risky. Gu Suining closed his eyes and raised his finger up, saying that Zhu Wen always sought punishment, because punishment would have resulted in him being isolated. He pointed down and added that Zhu Wen himself realized that cleaning windows would attract the dead, and he cleaned the most windows, setting the most zombies on himself and making himself their target. Thus, after he is put under house arrest, the dead will come for him and begin to destroy the wall to get him. He imagined Zhu Wen sitting in a box while zombies surrounded him outside. Wang Yuanqing scratched his cheek and realized how it was that zombies rescued Zhu Wen from imprisonment. Gu Suining crossed his arms contentedly and began to smile. Commentators thanked him for explaining the situation. Wang Yuanqing looked at Gu Suining and said that he generally understood what he meant, but he just didn't understand why Zhu Wen was sure that they would lock him up and not do anything else to him. Gu Suining was confused by such a question and began to come up with an answer. He gave Wang Yuanqing a thumbs up and said that he himself didn't know, but Zhu Wen had probably thought of it. It was night outside. Green leaves fell down to the ground. The players carried all the defeated zombies outside. Gu Suining and the shirtless man were cleaning the floor. Wang Yuanqing was holding some old pieces of paper in his hands. Zhu Wen approached the players and asked why they were not sleeping. They looked at him strangely, as if he had said something stupid. Wang Yuanqing handed him the pieces of paper and said that these were newspapers that they found in the destroyed wall between the wallpaper and concrete. They were sure that this was a clue and asked Zhu Wen to take a look at them. Wang Yuanqing came up behind him and asked if he thought the game wouldn't like the destroyed scenery. Zhu Wen stood on one knee and looked at the newspapers. He told the man that everything was fine and he even burned part of the game stage. The players gathered over the newspapers and began to read the contents. The newspaper says, the 102nd anniversary of the existence of the Mask Exhibition Hall. Time has flown past and, in a blink of an eye, it's already been 102 years. These years we have remembered the teachings of the ones before us, followed the rules and shown kindness to the people around us. Let the celebration commence. According to tradition, this year's museum will be open to the public on the 4th week of fall. The organizers have stated that they will carefully inspect everything as always. Zhu Wen, holding a newspaper, read that the 102nd exhibit was already ready to amaze people. Gu Suining paid attention to these words. He remembered what the exhibition time looks like now and said that in the 102nd year they opened the 102nd exhibit, and now there are 108 display cases in the exhibition hall, which means that the exhibition is already 108 years old. The man with glasses began to get irritated. He ordered them to stop counting the years and said that the mask that Director Ling ordered them to look for was broken. He asked where they should get a new mask. His words shocked the other players. Wang Yuanqing clenched his hand into a fist and said that it was a sword game. He grabbed his head doomedly and said that they are done and it was all for nothing. The girl with glasses asked in confusion what a sword game was. Gu Suining said that in his spare time he found a user on the forum with the nickname Master of Tarot, and he was a numbered user with tarot card skill, and he used the cards to sort the games. Gu Suining presented many tarot cards with different images around him. He said that games can be divided into 4 types: swords, bowls, pentacles, wands. Each kind of game had different settings. Wang Yuanqing covered his mouth in horror and said that a sword game requires the sacrifice of 1 or more players to complete. Usually such games end with players killing each other. The girl in the red dress turned pale and asked with horror whether they should use their faces as masks. All the players began to get nervous. They were silent, not knowing what to say. Zhu Wen closed his eyes and lowered his head. Gu Suining grabbed his hand in fear and began to call out to him. Still holding his hand, he asked him what he was thinking about. The main character answered in a serious tone that he was simply thinking about whose death would be most beneficial to them. This answer made Gu Suining at a loss. Zhu Wen immediately began to smile and said that he was joking. The zombie crowd began to approach the mansion again. The players looked at the stairs with horror in their eyes. The younger sister crawled along it with an ominous look. The girl with black hair was horrified and said that she was fast asleep at this time yesterday. Zhu Wen put his hands in his pockets and said that perhaps a key scenario had worked and she needed to get to work. The players asked in fear what kind of work it was. They looked at the main character blankly. The man wearing glasses sat down doomedly on the floor and grabbed his head. He shouted that he couldn't do this anymore, because they were surrounded by a horde of corpses, an older sister and a younger sister. He believed that there was no way out of this situation. Wang Yuanqing became angry and frowned. He shouted to him that all he was doing was being hysterical, and they needed to find the mask and complete the plot. The girl with black hair said in fear that the mask was made of human skin. The girl with glasses fell to the floor and shouted in alarm that she would not let them make a mask out of her face. Zhu Wen turned to the black-haired girl and asked where the blood was. She turned pale and said that yesterday afternoon the youngest drank everything she had. Meanwhile, the baby continued to crawl down the stairs. Saliva dripped from her mouth. The players looked at the child in fear. The man with glasses frowned, thinking that they only needed 1 mask. He reached his hand to the girl's shoulder, thinking that she would not mind sacrificing her life for the sake of other players. He almost touched her shoulder, hoping to sacrifice her. Suddenly his hand was grabbed by someone else's hand. It was Ju Wen. The main character smiled at him and told him to think before he acts. The man looked at him in fear. Ju Wen calmly looked back at him and said that if he tried to do what he had planned, then it would be his skin from his face that would become a mask. The girl in the red dress began to read children's fairy tales in a panic, trying to calm the child down. The baby growled at them aggressively, not giving them a chance to escape. Wang Yuanqing raised his hands desperately and anxiously and shouted that fairy tales would no longer work. Du Suining took out a pocket knife. He was preparing to slash his hand, saying that there was one last way left, that is, to feed her blood. Wang Yuanqing abruptly snatched the knife from his hands and asked why shed the young guy's blood. He was preparing to cut his palm, saying that he had a lot of alcohol and nicotine in his blood, and that one sip would give her a headache. He was serious, so he concentrated. He made a sharp movement with his hand to make a cut on his palm. Suddenly he discovered that there was no cut on his palm, and the knife had disappeared somewhere. Wang Yuanqing looked to the right and saw that Ju Wen was holding the knife. The man put his hand on his chest and worriedly asked why Ju Wen would do this, because he should use his strength and intelligence in more serious situations. Ju Wen folded the knife again and replied that this situation was just serious. He began to calmly walk towards his younger sister and began to list the things they had already found. A note in the window, an obituary in a drawer, old newspapers from the walls, rules emphasized everywhere, warnings associated with the Hall of Masks. He asked what they kept, what they supervised, and what they continued. Wang Yuanqing. The girl and Gu Suining looked at him in surprise, but did not say anything. Ju Wen squatted down and extended his hands towards his younger sister. He said he believes the answers to these questions are all around them. As he reached out to the baby, he asked if she had ever been on a swing. The baby opened his mouth wide, revealing sharp teeth. She grabbed Ju Wen's hand. Gu Suining ran up to him and asked him to be careful. Ju Wen smiled and said that her bite force was trivial. He picked up the child from the floor. While she was clinging to his hand, Ju Wen was preparing to throw her to the side. He threw her out of the window, breaking the glass. The child from the mansion went straight into the forest. The zombies noticed the sudden noise. Ju Wen then jumped out of the window outside. He landed carefully on both feet. The main character stood in front of the forest, listening to the howls of the dead that they were very hungry. Suddenly the corpses heard that someone was approaching them. They turned around and were horrified to find Ju Wen. The zombies started to look pathetic when they were told that they had to be reasonable, and if they couldn't defeat him, that didn't mean they couldn't eat others. Ju Wen pointed at the child and said that they could take her, let them consider it an apology for scaring them. The zombies looked at him blankly. He asked if they didn't understand why he was so kind. He pointed to his hand, where the bite was visible, and said that the one who landed near them attacked him. Ju Wen asked them to be more aggressive. Zombies surrounded the baby from all sides. They ran in a crowd towards the younger sister, who did not understand anything. The zombies grabbed her and began to try to chew and tear her apart. Ju Wen looked at this and encouraged the zombies. Someone appeared behind him. It was the older sister. She was very angry with the guy. Ju Wen turned to her. The sister began to talk about something. Her face turned pale and she began to look scared. She watched as her little sister tore apart zombies with her teeth. Although she tried to resist them, there were more dead people. The older sister began to frown and clenched her teeth. She ran towards the forest because she wanted to save her younger sister. Ju Wen immediately started running after her, trying to catch up. He tried to block her path, asking what was wrong. The girl tried to punch him and ordered him to get out of the way. The guy dodged the attack. The girl tried to kick him and shouted that her mother said that she needed to take care of her younger sister. Ju Wen stopped her second kick with his hand. He was thrown a couple of meters back. The guy smiled and asked why she was worried about her little sister, but not about her brother. Suddenly, an expression of horror appeared on his face. He saw the angry sister swing her leg again. She was about to hit him on the head, but Ju Wen managed to duck down. My sister's foot hit a tree. The blow was so strong that the tree broke in half. The rest of the players went outside. Gu Suining and Wang Yuanqing were making their way through the forest. They saw the battle, and Wang Yuanqing said that elder sister's agility and strength are both well above Ju Wen's. He asked if Ju Wen would lose. He ran in the other direction and said that he would bring the main character a couple of useful tools. Gu Suining stopped him. They looked at Ju Wen and sister's battle again, and Gu Suining said that Ju Wen was fine. He didn't even use his left hand. He frowned and suggested that the main character was stalling for time. Ju Wen dodged his sister's attack again. Her impact left cracks in the stone surface under their feet. The girl stood up and swung her fist at Ju Wen. The guy managed to grab her by the wrist. After that, he grabbed her neck. The guy knocked her to the ground and bent over to her. This scene made Gu Suining very embarrassed. He began to blush and thought that he was only 16 and he shouldn't look at this. Zhu Wen hung over the girl and asked what the rush was for. He tilted his head even closer to his sister and asked if she was afraid of doing wrong again and being punished again. The girl was stunned and did not know what to answer. Zhu Wen removed his hand from her neck. As soon as he did this, the sister bared her teeth and hit him on the arm. She grabbed his arms and lifted him off her with her foot. The sister managed to get to her feet and roll over. Zhu Wen grabbed her hand. Now he was on the ground, and his sister was above him. Zhu Wen smiled and asked that if elder sister acts indecently, does it count as a mistake? The girl looked at him angrily, baring her teeth. His sister sat on top of him, not allowing him to escape her grip. Zhu Wen said that he thought that she could have met them with a task the very next day, and asked why there was a hidden task to find the elder sister then. The main character smiled calmly and said that it was she who ruined the 108th mask and hid it under the display case. The girl did not answer him and continued to listen. The guy seemed friendly. He told her that mom didn't know what she did with the mask, so she received a simple punishment, even without the squeezing narrow walls that Zhu Wen had. He grabbed her wrist and the girl tried to break free. She failed, her hand trembling due to Zhu Wen's strong grip. The guy asked why this happened, and he answered his own question. If no one found out about the offense, then it is not. And if it does not exist, then neither does the real punishment. They lay in a large dent on the ground. Zhu Wen said that punishment is an important part of the game, and one can understand what can help and give a hint or even a way to complete a level. He realized that his sister did not tell any of Zhu Wen's misdeeds because she was afraid that he would tell her mother about her misdeeds. So he had to break the window so that she would not have the opportunity to ignore him. Translucent clouds covered the white moon. Gu Suining asked what they were talking about, to which Wang Yuanqing told him that he himself could not hear. They watched them from afar. The rest of the players came running to them. The man with glasses pointed at his sister and Zhu Wen and asked if they should do something about this. Gu Suining, with a straight face, suggested that he go and interrupt them himself. The man with glasses smiled embarrassedly and asked him to forget about it. Eldest sister was able to pull her hand away from Zhu Wen's grasp. The main character said that their mother ordered them to return before 10 p.m. because after this time the corpses begin to be active. He asked why corpses still calmly end up in the house. Zhu Wen pointed his finger at the zombies and said that this is all because they are the real punishment. The younger sister desperately tried to protect herself from the attacks of the dead. When Zhu Wen said this, the sister was horrified that he understood everything. The main character looked at her with his green eyes. He swung his fist and tried to hit her in the face. The older sister dodged, leaning on her arm. She jumped away from Zhu Wen. The guy shook the dust off his shoulders and said that the reason he wasn't crushed by the walls in the closet was because they had to carry out the last stage of the punishment. The elder sister looked at him seriously and asked what was the use of him knowing all this. She said that if the younger sister was hurt, they would all die in the night. Zhu Wen raised his finger and said that only one person will die today. The sister was taken aback by his statement. Zhu Wen took out an obituary from his inventory. He said that he initially assumed that these names of dead individuals could give them a clue. He held up the obituary and said that the zombies were guarding the list because the names on it belonged to them. And this obituary inscription said that they were all guilty. The younger sister squeezed her eyes shut as the zombies dragged her away again. Zhu Wen took out the remaining notes and said that the advice in the display case was obvious. They kept it because the zombies were punished and these are their faces. It was necessary to supervise in order to prevent others from avoiding what happened to him. The sister who heard this was shocked by his words. Zhu Wen looked at her seriously and continued speaking. The statement about continuation was a warning, just like newspapers. Like, if you do something wrong, you will become an exhibit. He remembered how the display cases were arranged in the exhibition hall. Zhu Wen said that there were 108 display cases and only one was empty, because there was a mask broken by his sister. When she realized that she had been discovered, her sister was horrified. Zhu Wen showed the bite on his hand and said that the only one who did wrong today was the younger sister who attacked him. The younger sister's face became a mask and became an exhibit. Many zombies stood at the shelves with masks made of human skin. They pulled the skin from the sister's face onto the mannequin. Gu Suining looked at this in horror and asked if it was really possible to do such a thing. The judge doll appeared above the players and began congratulating the players. She stopped abruptly and turned her attention to something. The doll looked at the crowd of zombies and asked what kind of trick Zhu Wen pulled to pass the level. The main character crossed his arms and said that they have replaced the 108th mask and the game is neutral. He asked the doll if she would give up her duties because of this. The doll looked down at him, agreeing with him. However, she got angry and clenched her hands into fists, asking who you have to be to use the NPC's face to pass. She slapped her face with the palm of her hand and congratulated the players on successfully completing the level. Ju-Wen put his hands on his hips and asked about completion. Players with happy faces rejoiced at the end of the game. The doll announced that the counting of each player's contribution and the awarding of points began. She started to announce Ju-Wen's glasses, but the main character raised his hand and said that he had a question. The doll displeasedly put her hands on her hips and asked what else he needed. Ju-Wen put his hands in his pockets and said that at the novice level, he only burned down the house and was forced to listen for it. But he didn't even touch the estate. He asked why she so easily agreed with him and hurried to read out the results. The doll clenched her teeth and began to get angry. Ju-Wen pointed his finger at the ceiling and asked if they needed this location. He said their Echo group communicates with other groups and browses the forum, and no one has met this level in the last 8 years. The doll crossed her arms over her chest and looked at the guy angrily. Ju-Wen touched his temple with his finger and said that he had a guess, but there was no clear basis for it. He decided to just guess her. The guy spread his arms to the sides while the doll looked at him with an angry look. The doll began to frown and become increasingly angry. The guy covered his eyes and said that although the locations and scenes that each group goes through are different, each player has 7 days to rest. Behind Ju-Wen stood the rest of the players. The main character said that given the number of players around the world, he doubts that someone like her, who enjoys watching players try to survive and complete a level, will put much effort into them. The doll clenched her hand into a fist and indignantly asked what he meant. Ju-Wen pointed to the wall behind him and said that although he had burned quite a few houses, it actually didn't have much of an impact, and the game location was still usable. But this level was different. If he burns the estate, he will destroy the entire location. He asked why they didn't want to allow the location to be destroyed. Ju-Wen put his hand in his pocket and asked if it was because somewhere in the locations there was a script core responsible for their diversity. Ju-Wen took out a box of matches from his pocket. The doll looked at him in surprise. The guy immediately began to run away from the room in which they were located. The doll was furious and began to read out the results in a funny way. Ju-Wen's contribution to passing, 93%. Number of hidden tasks completed, 1. Number of hidden tasks, 1. Ju-Wen took first place among his group and receives an additional 300 points. The doll from its hands directed a pink beam at Ju-Wen and announced that he was receiving the achievement, Respectful Actor. It consisted in the fact that he did not forget about the observers and gave a first-class shock. 92% of the spectators were satisfied. For this he will receive more attention in subsequent games. Ju-Wen ran out into the street and a card appeared in his hands. The doll said that he receives a special rank item, a call to his sister. It allows you to request help from your sister 3 times. The card was pink and showed a senior playing with a phone in her hand. Ju-Wen stopped and looked at the map, asking the doll if it really wanted to finish so quickly. A huge lottery machine appeared in front of Ju-Wen, with many colored capsules inside. The doll said his contribution has reached the 60% threshold and he gets 1 shot at the lottery. Ju-Wen made an interested face and said that it would be fun. He looked at the lottery machine and crossed his arms, saying that with his investment, 1 try was too little. The doll loomed over him and aggressively asked him to take the attempt within a minute, otherwise it would be taken as a refusal to participate. Ju-Wen raised his head and called the organizers greedy. He twisted the golden handle of the machine. After that, a large plastic ball appeared in the winning tray. He opened the white and blue capsule. Inside it was a strange book with erotic content. The doll congratulated him on receiving a rank B item, vulgar content. The doll against the background of the moon spread out its arms and said that when using this item, you can distract the attention of any creature for 30 seconds. You can use it 5 times. The doll made a creepy and crazy expression as it ordered Ju-Wen to look at it. The main character put the empty capsule back into the machine. He understood that this item had many uses. There haven't been any specialized items in the game yet, probably for balance. With this in mind, freely distracting your attention for 30 seconds in the right situation is very useful and can save your life. The doll took hold of the hem of her dress and began to take stock. Ju-Wen, with an overwhelming contribution, led his group to fulfill the conditions for passing, receiving the maximum reward for completing this level, 25 points. In total, he scored 39 points for completing the level, including the reward for completing the hidden task. His calculation was completed, and the doll began calculating the other players' points. Ju-Wen put his fist to his chin and realized that he was most likely right. However, if the core of the scenario exists, then how many people are in heaven at one time? There are probably a lot of cores, and they will be difficult to find and destroy. Zhu Wen imagined a map in his head that showed the areas where all the players were located. He pursed his lips and looked at the sky. The doll began to dance ballet in the sky. She reported that the game's duration is 360 hours, with a completion time of 58 hours. The completion result exceeds 97% of players. Grade S. Each player receives an additional 200 points. Players received a hidden achievement, no one will die. Each player is rewarded with 150 points. The game is over and players will leave after 30 seconds. Zhu Wen was surprised and asked why they were given only 30 seconds this time. Because last time they were given a minute. Gu Suining appeared behind him. He crouched down to Zhu Wen and told him that the game wanted to send them out quickly. The doll started counting down. She looked at the players as they all went outside. Zhu Wen raised his hand again and said that he had one more question. The doll hurriedly finished the report and said goodbye to him. She was beside herself with anger and his questions. Zhu Wen entered an abstract space and said that when he returned, he would make a list of questions and ask them again. His head was raised up as he moved into the real world. He found himself in his bed. The sun was shining outside the window. He opened the door and began to leave the room, asking Zhang Ling, his sister, if they had food at home. He walked into the kitchen and realized that she had already left. He noticed a note fluttering on the refrigerator. The note from Zhang Ling said, "The head of the group asked me to pick up a person in a nearby city. The entire route will take approximately 3 days. Sorry, you have to order food delivery." Zhu Wen picked up the smartphone, asking if there would be a newcomer. He said that it doesn't matter because they are all the same. He started choosing his own food. The main character lived in an apartment complex. The delivery man rang the doorbell. Zhu Wen thanked the delivery man as he picked up his food. Suddenly, the delivery man called him by name. The delivery man was Wang Yuanqing, and he looked at the guy in surprise. They stood in the corridor near the elevator. Zhu Wen looked at him questioningly for a while. After that, he called the man the wrong name, after which Wang Yuanqing corrected him and smiled, pointing to his face. Zhu Wen, holding his order in his hand, asked him if he was working yet. Wang Yuanqing awkwardly rubbed the yellow helmet on his head and answered in the affirmative, because he has almost no money. He said that his previous employer counted that he had been away from work for more than half a month due to gambling, so they insisted that Wang Yuanqing accept compensation and fired him. Zhu Wen closed his eyes and said that in other matters he could not help, but for questions about the game, he could call the phone number. Zhu Wen handed Wang Yuanqing a business card with Echo's phone number. Wang Yuanqing took it in his hands and looked at it. He pointed to the business card in surprise and said that this is the same group of experienced players who make life easier for the rich. The man's eyes immediately lit up when he thought that he was being invited there. Zhu Wen raised the bag of food above his head, looking at it. He said that he did not invite him to the group and that he was just caught up in his thoughts. Wang Yuanqing's face immediately became blank. Zhu Wen touched the package from below and told Wang Yuanqing to call the phone number and register. The group regularly checks the players. If the missing person is missing for more than 2 months, they will come to his apartment and sort out the funeral. Wang Yuanqing smiled awkwardly and said that they seemed like quite attentive guys. Zhu Wen looked irritated at his hand, which he was touching the bottom of the bag with, realizing that the contents had actually spilled. Zhu Wen and Wang Yuanqing shook hands. The main character thanked the man and said that he could call if he needed help. Soy sauce was dripping from the bottom of the bag. Later this evening, a black cat was aggressive towards a white cat. Suddenly both cats noticed something. Someone's expensive and elite car pulled up into the yard. The father told his son that they had arrived. 2 men stood at the entrance to an apartment complex. The son was Gu Suining. His father was a wealthy man. He wore an expensive suit and glasses. They were both carrying packages. Father said that they would rise now. They went up to apartment number 1408. The man apologized for disturbing him and asked if Master Zhu Wen lived here. After some time, the son and father were already sitting at Zhu Wen's house while he was having dinner. Father said that Zhu Wen looks good and has a thoughtful look. The man smiled awkwardly and said that Gu Suining was his only child, and when he disappeared for several days, he could not sleep or work or even play games in peace. His son tried to stop him from telling embarrassing stories. Zhu Wen lay down on the sofa, eating meat. He said that Gu Suining is very smart in the game and is not afraid of difficulties. He is not bad for a beginner. He used chopsticks to grab the snack from the table. The main character said that if Gu Suining wants to continue playing, he needs to improve his physical condition. The man reached forward and said that he wanted a better life for his son. They couldn't escape the game. He asked why not establish a long-term partnership since they were associated with their group. Gu Suining looked at his father in surprise. Zhu Wen told them that most groups do not want to repeat orders, and this is also not profitable for the employer. He raised his chopsticks to the rice with meat and vegetables. The main character began to eat the next dish and said that if the customer is too dependent on the performer, then this can harm him. The man put his arm around Gu Suining's shoulder and objected, saying that Zhu Wen said that Gu Suining has good inclinations, even though they spoiled him since childhood, and there are not many members in their group Echo. Gu Suining removed his hand from his shoulder and shouted that his father told him that they were only here for the sake of gratitude. He got angry and asked his father why he brought up this topic, because everyone in Echo has first-class skills, and their selection is strict, and you have to pass the levels yourself. Gu Suining grabbed his father's hand and led him to the exit, asking why they would even take him if he didn't even have experience. The man turned to Zhu Wen and said that Gu Suining was flexible, and he hoped that Zhu Wen would consider the offer. Zhu Wen put the chopsticks on the empty plate and said that he was not in charge of group recruitment. His word in this matter meant nothing. He got up from the table and was about to see them out. The man reached into his pocket for something and asked Zhu Wen to wait. He handed him a bank check and said that, as a sign of sincerity, he was ready to pay 50 million annually for the needs of the Echo Group, without interfering in their affairs at all. Gu Suining objected to his father, saying that Zhu Wen was a strong and principled person who could not be easily bribed. Zhu Wen accepted the check and thanked the man, saying that he would talk to the group about it. They shook hands and the man said that he was counting on him. Gu Suining looked disappointed. He thought he was wrong about him. The father hit his son on the back and said that he was entrusting him to Zhu Wen, and asked him to do whatever he could. He went out into the corridor and finally told his son that he had done everything he could. Now his future depended only on him. The guys looked at the closed door. Zhu Wen asked if this was Gu Suining's biological father. Gu Suining answered him in the affirmative, although not very confidently. Zhu Wen looked at the guy and asked when was the last medical examination. He looked at Gu Suining and saw a halo above his head with the amount his father had paid him. The guy said he had a physical at the end of last year. Zhu Wen took the bag of food and said that he would go for a medical examination this afternoon. Gu Suining agreed with him and asked if he would need to learn to fight. He started boxing and said that he had games every 7 days, asking if such training would be of any use. Zhu Wen closed his eyes and said that it was ineffective from this point of view. Gu Suining turned to him blankly. He imagined himself with lots of muscles in a yellow suit. The guy thought that the Echo Group had their own secret training methods, something like an artificial gravity room or a hell pillar. Then he imagined himself placed in some kind of capsule. Zhu Wen threw away the bag of food he had eaten and said that if someone chases him day and night and even while sleeping, then sooner or later he will develop reflexes, because basic physical training and combat skills are important. Gu Suining looked at him with a slightly confused expression. He closed his eyes and frowned, thinking that only by relying on the will to survive could he push his body to its limits. Zhu Wen stood in the kitchen and Gu Suining approached him. The guy asked the main character if he would be his mentor. Zhu Wen smiled at him and clenched his fist, saying that if he hit him with full force, he would fly away even if there was 5 kilograms of weight tied to him. These words made Sui tense up. Zhu Wen put his hand on his shoulder and said that he was helping him join the group not in order to get extra ballast. He walked closer to Gu Suining and said that if he wanted to qualify, he would have to pass at least 1 level on his own. Gu Suining clenched his hands into fists. He was very motivated and said he would do it. The blue light began to flicker. The guy with purple eyes began to open his eyes. The roofs of some historical buildings could be seen. A guy with short hair and a black jacket and gray pants looked around. He was in some kind of excursion place where there were ancient Chinese buildings everywhere. The guy's name was Kai Yueman. He was from their Infinity Mastery group. Kai Yueman grabbed his stomach and looked at him. He was worried about an unhealed wound from the last playthrough of the game. He grabbed the wound harder. Although the wound was subject to the effect of entering the game, it still did not heal completely, becoming only mild and not severe. Kai Yueman looked at the giant stone wall, next to which was a building with wooden pillars. He noticed the ancient setting and thought it was a tourist spot. He assumed that in such a huge place and with an incredibly large number of people, it would be difficult to find a teammate. While he was walking around the area, he remembered his conversation with Jiang Ling. He then told her that he had 15,000 points and her brother only had 5,000 and he wasn't sure if her brother could. Jiang Ling told him that her brother thought the normal pace of the game was too slow and wanted to find a smart player for serious games. Kai Yueman told her that he was injured and did not ask her to protect him, but he also could not guarantee that he could take care of her brother in this condition. Jiang Ling smiled softly and said that she hoped that he would not cause problems for Kai Yuemin. Kai Yuemin walked out to the main square. Red lanterns were hung everywhere. The sun is bright. The guy understood that the higher the game's rating, the more dangerous it is. He hoped that Zhu Wen really had an extraordinary brain, but he had to find it first. Kai Yuemin raised his head and noticed the loudspeakers. An announcement from the tourist service center about a missing child was heard from the gray speakers. Kai Yuemin raised his head and began to listen carefully. The speaker asked to pay attention to a person with the following characteristics. Boy, 28 years old, height 181 centimeters, slender build. From the height there was a breathtaking view of the ancient buildings. The advert identified Kai Yuemin as a baby and said that his dad Zhu Wen was waiting for him at the tourist center. Kai Yuemin immediately realized that this was the same Zhu Wen he was looking for. The guy was angry at this method of searching. Commentators were very amused by this situation. Kai Yuemin lowered his gaze and frowned. Veins appeared on his face with anger, and he called Zhu Wen's name in a very angry tone. Kai Yuemin started swearing loudly. His curses echoed through the neighborhood between the trees and houses. Zhu Wen sat on a wooden bench and thought that all the signs in the city were in a foreign language. All the NPCs he had seen so far were blue-eyed, blonde foreigners. Looks like the story part of this level will be a little difficult. He leaned back and realized that the game hadn't sent a single game notification in half an hour. Someone's shadow appeared on Zhu Wen's face. Two gangster-type men loomed over him. One was a thin blonde, and the second was a fat brunette. The fat man started rubbing his chin and said that it was very stupid of him to reveal his location over the speakerphone. The blonde took out a knife. They began to threaten him with a knife and ordered him to give up all the things he had. Zhu Wen said in a calm tone that he understood that this was a robbery. The blonde ordered him to shut up and take out all the things from his inventory. Zhu Wen touched the knife that was pointed at him with his finger and said that entry with weapons is prohibited. The blonde looked at him menacingly and roughly ordered him to shut up. He shouted that he would kill him now, after which he attacked Zhu Wen with a knife. The main character grabbed him by the head. Holding his face, he threw it over himself. Zhu Wen hit the blonde man's head on the stone paving stones. Zhu Wen smiled at the robber and said that he had a good head. The fat man behind him ran towards the guy, shouting threats. Zhu Wen grabbed the blonde's knife and threw it at the fat man. The knife flew near the robber's face. The knife left a cut on his face. Zhu Wen turned to him and said that if he gave him everything he had, then he would give them a chance to leave. The man began to scream and curse, frowning. The shot rang out. Smoke came out of the revolver after the shot. The shooter advised him to listen to Zhu Wen. The blonde opened his eyes in surprise, looking at the shooter. Zhu Wen and the fat man also turned their attention to him. The shooter was Kai Yuemin, who pointed the revolver at the bandit. Continuing to aim at the fat man, he ordered the robbers to empty their pockets. On the floor were threads, a flashlight, toilet paper, duct tape, and a can. The bandits sat on the ground and thought that in this world, even during a robbery, some kind of nightmare happens. Kai Yuemin held them at gunpoint. Zhu Wen twirled some things in his hands and said that the items were even paired. The bandits sweated with anxiety and looked at the guys. When they were about to leave, Zhu Wen called out to them. They turned to him in fear, and the blonde asked in a trembling voice what had happened. Zhu Wen collected their items in his hands and said, his inventory is full, so he will use them as temporary storage and will pick them up when needed. These words confused the robbers. The fat man began to get angry and shouted that since he took it, he should take care of his things himself. The blonde shouted that he should let Zhu Wen carry his things himself. They shouted something after him and ran as fast as they could away from them. Zhu Wen, standing with their items in his hands, pretended to wipe a tear from his eyes and said that these two not only robbed him, but also cursed him. This made Kai Yuemin puzzled. Kai Yuemin extended his hand to Zhu Wen and introduced himself, saying that they had met once. Zhu Wen smiled at him and put his hand on his shoulder. He said that he remembered Kai Yuemin. Otherwise, how could he have given his description in the notification? Something caught Kai Yuemin's attention and he squinted. He pointed up and told Zhu Wen to look there. A man resembling an ancient Greek statue appeared surrounded by gold. He welcomed players to heaven and said that the introduction of this level is in passive mode. To activate it, you need to complete a task to get additional clues. Players must now proceed to the Visitor Registration Center. They had 30 minutes. The male judge had big blue eyes and was blonde. The judge announced that the average score of the players is 9187 points. The game duration is 120 hours. The number of participants is 9. Kai Yuman, looking at the judge, said that after reaching 8,000 points, he rarely encountered such short scenarios. Ju Wen stood in front of him and said that the game would be shorter based on how much time the player spent before starting the introductory story. He invited him to go. On the way, he videoed a place similar to this center. Kai Yuman closed his eyes without answering him. They followed each other along the stone slabs. Kai Yuman said that Ju Wen is good at analytics and doesn't seem impulsive, but he asked why he took the risk of searching the alert system. Ju Wen told him that it was convenient. Around them there were pillars with lanterns and various stalls with goods. Kai Yuman asked if Jiang Ling told him that he teamed up with him to lower the overall difficulty level. Ju Wen replied that he understood him and calmed him down, saying that he was sane. They reached the visitor registration center, whose sign was written in a foreign language. The blue-eyed blonde was crying and saying something in a foreign language while Ju Wen grabbed her face. The main character held a smartphone in his hands and told her that he didn't understand anything and asked her to repeat it again. Kai Yuman felt uneasy and wondered if it was too late to make a replacement player. Ju Wen and Kai Yuman were standing near the reception desk. The main character was still holding the administrator's face and said that the game did not have an internet connection, but he was downloading an offline translator. The blonde no longer looked scared, but angry. She shouted something to him in a foreign language. Ju Wen let her go and said that he needed to record the sound and did not understand her. Ju Wen held the phone to her mouth while she aggressively shouted something. Kai Yuman stood leaning against the counter. He was shocked by what a strange player he had teamed up with. Ju Wen walked up to him while looking at something on his phone and said that the girl had been talking non-stop for 20 minutes and she seemed to be in a good mood. The girl herself was walking somewhere angrily. The app on Ju Wen's phone began automatically translating the girl's words. There were only insults and curses. Kai Yuman listened to this with a tense face. He slapped himself in the face with the palm of his hand and said that of the 20 minutes of conversation, 18 minutes were devoted to all sorts of insults. Ju Wen looked at his phone and said that there is no fantasy. Kai Yuman crossed his arms and looked at the annoyed Ju Wen, who was reading something on his phone. Kai Yuman put his hand to his chin and said that their role is that they are actors invited by the mayor. The main character turned to him, holding the phone to his chest, and agreed with him. He said that a city festival dedicated to traditional Oriental culture would soon begin. He pointed at the NPC. One of them was a blonde European man with glasses. A dark-skinned woman with dreadlocks walked next to him. Ju Wen said that all the residents are foreigners, unfamiliar with Oriental images, and they have problems making props. They hoped the players would help them prepare the props in final preparations. The main character went somewhere, and Kai Yuman asked where he went. Ju Wen waved his hand and said that he had gone to prepare the props because they only had 120 hours and needed to hurry up. Kai Yuman looked at him incomprehensibly and thought why then he infuriated the administrator for 20 minutes, listening to swearing, and listening to the translation for the same amount of time. Ju Wen and Kai Yuman walked along the clean streets of the city where the festival was taking place. One of them said that if the NPCs only mentioned the problem with the images, then they probably found things for the props easily. Ju Wen pointed the camera at the inscription above the door and said that this was the backstage of the festival, and there were probably clues to be found. Kai Yuman suggested going there and taking a look. They entered the room and Ju Wen said that everyone was assembled. The rest of the players, including the bandits, stood around the table with caps. The blonde said that there were a lot of hats on the table and asked if they would play the Spirits of Death. Kai Yuman looked at the caps wearily. Everyone else looked at them too. Some hats were black, some were white. Next to them were brushes and mascara. A girl with long red hair said that the hats were clean and there were brushes nearby. She was interested in what should be written on the hats. The bandits forced her out and took the brushes in their hands. The blonde asked how it was possible not to know this. The blonde wrote in calligraphy on a white cap, "One look brings wealth." The fat man wrote an inscription on the black cap, "Peace on Earth." A man with blonde hair in a business suit approached them and rudely asked if they really just wrote the right answers, and what the rest should do. Kai Yuman turned to Ju Wen with a calm face and asked if he had any ideas. He answered in the affirmative and picked up the cap and brush. He began to deftly move his brush over the hat under the surprised looks of the players. The header said, "Because we are here." The girl in a brown coat and a cap also began to write something on her cap. On the cap it was written, "Everyone is already dead." The bandits and the man in the brown shirt looked in disbelief, narrowing their eyes. Kai Yuman also grabbed his hat and began to write. On Kai Yuman's hat it was written, "The child is still small." All the players stood around the table. The blonde asked irritably what kind of jokes, and suddenly they would have problems. Kai Yuman began to twirl the brush in his hands and told him to relax, and from what he saw, the local NPCs do not have a common language, and even if there were a few characters who knew the language, it seemed that they did not understand anything about Oriental images at all. That's why they write these inscriptions. There were tents with Chinese fireworks on the street. The girl in the coat began to wipe her fingers off the mascara and agreed with Zhu Wen, saying that it is not so important what they write. The main thing is that there are 4 hieroglyphs. Kai Yuman calmly told her that it made sense, but he realized it too late. He and Zhu Wen stood behind this girl. The girl with red hair was writing something with a brush. The man in the brown shirt was confused. On the table were hats with various inscriptions in ink. A referee appeared above the players and announced that the players would be divided into groups based on the color of their hats. He asked players of all groups to unite to complete the story. Finally, the judge wished everyone a pleasant game. The blonde man in the t-shirt held a white hat in his hands and angrily asked if this meant that they were in the zone of the wands and were divided into groups. His friend held a black hat in his hands and said angrily that if he had known, he would have chosen a hat of the same color. Zhu Wen looked at the hat with a smile on his face. Kai Yuman had a hat of the same color in his hands. He thought that in the wand zone there was a division into groups and an internal system in which the losing group was sent to compete again. Sooner or later the 2 groups will clash in competition. This may cause skirmishes or killings. Kai Yuman closed his eyes and sighed in relaxation. He was glad that he chose the white hat, just like Zhu Wen. Kai Yuman couldn't let him die in this game. Zhu Wen put his hat on his head and tried to hold it on his head. He suggested that Kai Yuman go and submit the assignment to the NPC registration center. Kai Yuman himself looked at him blankly. The commentators were divided into 2 types. Some really wanted to see the battle, and some did not want to see them fight. They approached the visitor registration center building. Inside there was a sign dividing the players into groups. The white group included Zhu Wen and Kai Yuman. A blonde man with a white cap on his head stood next to the table. The blonde administrator politely asked the players of the black group to go into the next room. Next to her stood a fat man with a black hat. The girl turned to Zhu Wen and looked at him angrily. The door slammed in front of Zhu Wen's face. Kai Yuman tried to calm him down, saying that being the target of an NPC is not so scary, because no one knows how it will end. The main character turned to him and frowned. He said that if you are vindictive and work hard, then when you are young you will not live long. Kai Yuman looked at him disappointed, thinking that he was also worried that Zhu Wen would be scared. The girl in the coat said that the NPC left the task. She directed the phone to the board and said that the translator said that they should find a special prop for their group. Zhu Wen looked at the keychain hanging on the board. He asked if there were any specifics in the task. The girl responded negatively and said that the NPC had left them the key to their sleeping place. She pointed to a 2-story house with a gray roof and said that they would live there. Zhu Wen put his hand on Kai Yuman's shoulder with a serious face. The guy turned to the main character and asked if everything was okay. Kai Yuman put his hand on his stomach and said that everything will be fine if you don't move too much. The rest of the players also went outside. Zhu Wen proposed to split up and meet at this place in 3 hours. Zhu Wen was left alone on the street. It became foggy around him. A white owl sat on a wooden beam. Zhu Wen looked at her with a surprised face. The owl took off and flew forward, leaving behind white feathers. Zhu Wen ran after the owl. A face from the fog appeared in front of the main character, which seemed to be screaming at him. The face smiled evilly, causing Zhu Wen to back away. He stopped in place, and the location began to sharply distort. A purple light appeared. Zhu Wen covered his face with his hand from the bright light. He narrowed his eyes, looking forward. The next minute he saw through his fingers the bright hospital light, and the nurse. A second nurse stood next to her. The pink-haired nurse was asking where Dr. Zhan was and if he was still in the operating room. A nurse with gray hair shouted that they had a child with chemical burns and the parents were not with her. A little boy had brought her. A man in a brown coat stood next to them. All 3 rushed forward down the corridor. Behind them stood a little boy in a gray jacket. A framed photograph of a child fell onto the surface of the water. It was a little girl with black hair. She was smiling in the photo. The glass on the frame broke. In the fragments one could see reflections of happy childhood moments, but suddenly in a large shard of glass an image of a brutal car accident, and the consequences after it appeared. Shards of glass began to fall into the water one after another. The spray of water began to take the shape of a hand. The water hand moved forward. The hand grabbed the boy's dark curly hair. This was Zhu Wen as a child. He was dragged into the abyss by many watery hands, and there was a grimace of horror on his face. He reached out with his hand to the photograph, which was torn into small pieces. The boy stood with his eyes downcast. Someone said that the child was adopted and his parents were not with him. The man in the brown coat extended his hand to Zhu Wen. They stood on the surface of the water. Doctors said that the girl's condition was very serious. In the reflection of the water, an image of an already adult Zhu Wen appeared. The guy was standing in the hospital corridor. The nurse asked him where his mom and dad were. She approached the adult Zhu Wen and said that his sister's condition was very serious. The nurse stood next to the guy and looked forward, saying that the doctors were already providing emergency care to his sister. The nurse approached his ear and said that his sister's further treatment might require surgery. In Zhu Wen's eyes, the reflection of his unconscious sister in the hospital bed could be seen. The nurse stroked Zhu Wen's face and said that the guardian's signature would be needed. She called him baby and asked if he remembered his mom or dad's phone number, saying she would help him contact them. Zhu Wen's face was emotionless and slightly confused. Commentators asked whether this was Zhu Wen's past. They hoped that everything would be fine with him. A girl with gray skin and long black hair appeared behind Zhu Wen. She towered over him and the nurse, blowing black smoke around her. She ordered him to continue wandering in the past. The nurse looked at Zhu Wen sadly and called him a child, starting to say something. The main character lowered his head and interrupted her. He said that they need his mom and dad to come to register his sister's hospitalization and discuss the subsequent treatment plan. And he is still too small. These issues must be resolved by his parents. The nurse was surprised and taken aback. Zhu Wen stood with his back to her. He turned to her and, with an emotionless face, asked if that was what she wanted to tell him. The nurse was shocked. She froze in surprise. The girl could not believe that he said what she intended to say. Zhu Wen put his hands in his pockets and said that this is a memory extraction, a mental attack, and it seems that it is all an illusion. The nurse tried to convince him otherwise. The creepy spirit of the girl sharply drew attention to them. Zhu Wen turned around sharply and ran towards the spirit. The nurse tried to stop him and asked where he had run. The main character ran up to the girl's spirit. An old man with an IV sat next to him. Zhu Wen looked at him, turning his head towards him. The old man looked at the guy in surprise and fear. Just a second later, Zhu Wen kicked the old man's IV with his foot. The tube from the IV was inserted into the old man's hand, and he flew forward along with the IV. The solution went straight into the spirit's stomach, piercing right through it. A gold pendant on a chain emerged from the girl's body. Inside the pendant was a black and white photograph of a young girl. Zhu Wen managed to grab the pendant by the chain before it fell. The main character ran further forward. The photo of the girl wearing the pendant changed her facial expression. He ran to the toilet. There were signs on the doors indicating men's and women's restrooms. He went into the toilet, where there were squat toilets in the cubicles. He opened one of the booths with a kick. Zhu Wen sat down near the toilet and held a pendant over it. He ordered him to be pulled out of here in 3 seconds. The main character began the countdown. At the last second, the chain slipped out of his hands. It sank halfway into the toilet. Zhu Wen managed to catch the chain before it was completely submerged in the toilet. The pendant became dirty and began to smell unpleasant. Zhu Wen covered his nose and ordered him to be pulled out of here. Commentators laughed at the situation. Zhu Wen ordered to start pulling him out. The girl in the photo made an angry face and said that he could only dream about it. Zhu Wen smiled and reached into his pocket for something. He said he knew she wouldn't cooperate. The main character asked her not to be so vindictive, because she is a ghost. He felt in his pocket for a box of matches on which a bird was drawn. He struck a match on the grater to light it. Zhu Wen held a burning match to the photo and said that he would burn it. The girl in the photo looked scared. The main character has already started setting fire to the photo. The girl's photo began to burn, and she shouted to the guy that he was merciless. Zhu Wen looked around and noticed that the illusion was starting to disappear, and the surroundings were finally starting to become normal. He dipped the pendant back into the toilet to extinguish it and said that everyone must observe fire safety. The girl's photograph was underwater. She started crying and said that this was actually a sin. Zhu Wen looked around and was glad that he had returned back. He took out his phone. The clock showed 12:05 p.m. There were still 20 minutes left before the agreed time. It was time to go back. Zhu Wen looked at the girl's photo with a grin and said how dirty she is. The girl was very angry and swore at the guy. There was a foul smell coming from the pendant, and a piece of the photo was burned. Zhu Wen continued to hold the chain and pendant in his hands. He approached the building where his team was supposed to live. Zhu Wen walked inside and saw a pensive Kai Yuemin. The main character came closer to the guy and asked if he had found the clues. Kai Yuemin pointed to the bathroom and said that this is not a clue. There is only one bathroom in the building. He He frowned and didn't know how to tell him about it. Kai Yuman said that the bathroom is strange. Inside the bathroom there were splatters of scarlet blood everywhere. Zhu Wen walked to the bloody carpet and said that the blood was already dry. He got down on one knee and said the blood had been there for days. The main character looked in the other direction and saw pieces of skin and black hair on the floor. He stood up while Kai Yuman looked at him. Zhu Wen turned to him and began to leave the bathroom. Kai Yuman asked with a sarcastic smile if this scared him, because he seemed seriously puzzled. He said that when he opened the door, this stench also hit his nose. He asked not to worry and said that this place is not that big, so if something happens, he can scream and everyone will hear. Zhu Wen pointed to the bathroom with a dissatisfied face and asked if there was a house manager here. He said that he could ask for a room next to the bathroom to make it more comfortable at night. Kai Yuman looked at him with a puzzled and uncomprehending face. All the white team players gathered together in one room. A blonde with blue eyes and a pink dress approached them. She said in Icelandic that this was her home. They could eat and she would take care of them. The girl extended her hand to the players with a wide smile and said that her name was Chris. She asked what their names were. Zhu Wen, sitting on the sofa, extended his hand to her and introduced himself. While they were shaking hands, the main character told her that he does not eat ginger, garlic, offal, animal genitals, or raw and cold things. The players listening to this rolled their eyes and were surprised at his impudence. Chris closed her eyes and smiled, saying that she understood. Zhu Wen removed the sleeve of his sweater from his wrist. He opened the blue system menu. A system menu has appeared, updating individual player number 6. Individual tasks for numbered players are aimed at key characters in the plot. The main thing was wondering if Chris was one of those. Several system windows appeared. Chris is normal. The task is being updated. The northern girl at the registration center likes. The old lady next door likes. Zhu Wen realized that the system had frozen. He began to look at the behavior of the system with a thoughtful face. Several new system windows have appeared. Job update failed. Rebooting. Loading job. Loading failed. Reboot. Zhu Wen already looked irritated and dissatisfied. A system window appeared. The reward for an individual task is 32 points. Zhu Wen realized that it was a bug. He snapped his finger, attracting Kai Yuman's attention. He approached the main character and asked what was the matter. Zhu Wen warned him that there might be some problems with the game. Kai Yuman frowned slightly and put his fist to his chin. He said that over the years the only problem with this game was that it was deadly, but other than that there were no other problems. He still thanked Zhu Wen and wanted to pat him on the head. Zhu Wen moved away from Kai Yuman's hand dissatisfiedly and said that everything was fine. Evening came. White stars began to appear above the roofs of buildings. Streams of water flowed down the bathtub. Water was coming out of the shower head. The main character put it in its place. Zhu Wen began to wipe the water off his body. He was wearing a t-shirt and shorts. He said he cleaned the bathroom and asked if anyone wanted to take a shower. A girl in a cap came up to him and said that she would go and wash herself. Kai Yuman closed his eyes tiredly and thought that Zhu Wen did not know what fear was. The main character wiped his face with a towel and said, "The girl is very brave." She ran her hands through her black hair and said that she couldn't do anything about her greasy hair. She felt uncomfortable as long as it was dirty. The girl said her name was Jai Shuang and shook Zhu Wen's hand. He looked at the handshake as drops of water dripped from his face. He felt uncomfortable when he realized that she had just touched her dirty hair with this hand. The rest of the players from the white team looked at them in shock and asked if they were on a blind date. Jai Shuang entered the bathroom, standing on the cold tiles. She began to take off her clothes. The commentators were delighted. The girl opened a stream of water. She began to take a hot shower, steam filling the entire bathroom. Commentators watched her without a twinge of conscience. Suddenly her hair turned white at the roots. Someone's pale hand with black claws touched Jai Shuang's back. She turned around and saw a monster with white hair and a long blue tongue. A scream was heard from the bathroom, which attracted the attention of the other players. Zhu Wen ran and abruptly opened the bathroom door. Kai Yuman covered his face and said that Jai Shuang was still taking a shower. Jai Shuang was wrapped in a towel. She strangled the monster with a shower hose. Zhu Wen and the others looked at what was happening in surprise. Jai Shuang frowned and reproached them for just standing there and not helping. Kai Yuman turned pale and said that young people today are unusually brave. The blonde was silent and in shock. He pointed at Jai Shuang with an excited and worried expression and shouted about her hair. He asked why they were white if they had just been black. The girl asked if he had heard of hair dye and said that there was no point in asking about albinism. Jai Shuang had dye washed off not only from his hair, but also from his eyebrows and eyelashes. Commentators said that this girl can be called an older sister, so they should not pay attention to her attractiveness. Zhu Wen grabbed the monster by the neck. Jai Shuang headed towards the exit and said that she was leaving the monster to him. Zhu Wen lifted the monster up and said that he was lucky and the clue came into his hands. Drops of water fell from the shower head. Zhu Wen continued to strangle the monster, lifting it off the ground. The main character grinned and asked if the monster would give him a hint or if he should take it by force. The monster stuck out its long blue tongue and muttered something unintelligible. The monster stretched out its bony fingers and pointed somewhere. Zhu Wen looked back and realized that the monster was pointing to a photograph hanging on the wall. The other players also looked there. It was a family photo. It depicted a mother, father, grandfather, and baby. The monster pointed to its neck and muttered something. Zhu Wen seemed to understand him and let go of the monster's neck. Immediately after this, the monster disappeared into the drain with lightning speed. The blonde approached him and asked in bewilderment why he let him go. Zhu Wen ignored the guy's question and walked towards Jai Shuang. He asked if the monster had attacked him. Jai Shuang crossed her arms over her chest with displeasure and said that the monster did not attack him. She herself noticed that he was spying on her, after which she attacked him first. Commentators were shocked. Zhu Wen smiled faintly and said that we should wait until tomorrow and discuss everything then. The main character went to his room and started looking at something in the system menu. He opened the list of items, which contained cards of his sister and the white rabbit. He called his sister, and a girl in a black dress appeared. She crossed her arms over her chest in displeasure and said that he really dared to address him. Zhu Wen smiled awkwardly. He put on a cute face and pretended to be helpless and asked his sister to come to him because he had questions for her. The older sister looked at him annoyed and said that he could ask, but as soon as she answered, she would leave. Zhu Wen leaned back and asked where she would go, and whether she would crawl away along the telephone line. The girl was very unhappy and did not answer him. The guy looked at her and said that if she was tired of him, then he could remain silent and not ask anything else. The older sister told him not to be impudent. Zhu Wen returned to his original position and asked how to complete the level. This question confused the girl. She made a disdainful face and asked if he was using her as a passing aid. The main character turned to her and pointed his finger at her, saying that if she couldn't answer, then she didn't know. The girl clicked displeasantly and looked down. Zhu Wen lay down under the blanket and told her to forget about everything. The girl is slowly losing her composure. She closed her eyes and remained silent. Zhu Wen turned to her while lying down and asked why she was still here. The girl remained silent again. Zhu Wen made an irritated face and asked if she was still obliged to answer a question that might be asked if it was related to current information. The girl got angry and clenched her fists, shouting that he was also asking this. Zhu Wen told her that even if she asks, she doesn't know, so her sister is useless. He curled back into the blanket and wished her good night, leaving the girl perplexed. The next day, Zhu Wen yawned tiredly. Tears appeared at the corners of his eyes. He went out into the dining room and said good morning. All the players were having breakfast. Kai Yuemin wished him good morning in return and continued talking about something. Suddenly the guy got scared and loudly asked who it was with Zhu Wen. The older sister stood next to the main character. She looked very unhappy. The blonde made a smart face and said that this was a physical manifestation of his spiritual power. The older sister looked at him angrily, after which the guy immediately covered his mouth with his hand. Zhu Wen began to sit down with the rest of the players at the table and asked if anything happened last night. Kai Yuemin looked at him calmly and replied that a ghost had appeared again, but this time it was the ghost of a child. The blonde put his hand on the table and said that he saw the ghost of a woman. A girl with red hair said with tears in her eyes that she had met the ghost of her grandfather. Zhu Wen turned to Jai Shuang, who was drinking coffee, and asked if she had met anyone. Hot steam came from the coffee. The girl replied that she was fast asleep and did not hear anything. Zhu Wen turned to his elder sister and asked what kind of ghosts appeared yesterday. The girl scratched her cheek and replied that these were the original owners of the house. Zhu Wen crossed his arms and asked if that was all. He said that even a child would figure it out before then, and then told her to go. The sister looked at him angrily and bared her teeth. The blonde was shocked by his answer and spat out the water he was drinking. Zhu Wen said goodbye to her as she walked away from him unhappily. They went outside. There was a beautiful view of ancient buildings and structures. The players from the white group met the players from the black group. The fat man says that the whole day has passed, and there is no progress in the plot. The man in the brown shirt told him that the NPCs didn't want to talk to them and asked if they had missed any clues. Zhu Wen interrupted their conversation and asked what about the Scandinavian woman at the registration center. The fat man was puzzled and said he didn't know, but immediately after that he asked what they were doing here. The blonde and fat man greeted each other. The blonde asked why don't they come if their team came too. The fat man said that wasn't what he wanted to say. He frowned and said that their team was settled in separate houses and they agreed to meet here, and asked if that was the case with them. The blonde began to gesture and said that they were housed together. A guy with blonde hair approached the fat man and told him to finish and come with him. They went somewhere, talking about something. Ju-wen said that perhaps the black group found more information. He assumed that the Scandinavian woman told them everything that happened. Tai Yuman told him that there were 5 in the white team and 4 in the black team. He pictured the scales in his head and said the game tipped the scales in their team's favor for balance. A Scandinavian woman approached them and asked something. She looked at them angrily and started shouting something. Tai Yuman took out his phone, which began to translate everything she said. She asked what they forgot here, and said that she had nothing for them. Let them get out of here and forget the way here. Ju-wen crossed his arms over his chest, told her that she didn't tell them what to look for, and asked how they would find something they didn't even know about. Tai Yuman's phone translated everything for the girl. The girl grinned and pointed her finger at them. She said that she didn't care and that they were waiting for death, asking why she shouldn't hide the clues from them. She started to provoke the guy to attack her, but shouted that he didn't dare kill an important NPC. Within a second, a knife flew into her forehead. She fell silent and blood began to flow from her forehead. The smile disappeared from the Scandinavian woman's face. Her eyes began to dim. She fell to the ground dead under Tai Yuman's shocked gaze. Ju-wen looked at her irritably and said that she was angry and strange. Tai Yuman turned pale with horror and asked if he had started doing his thing again. Ju-wen, Tai Yuman and Jai Shuang gathered around the girl's corpse in the middle of the street. Ju-wen pulled out the bloody knife from the Scandinavian woman's head. He calmly began to wipe the blood from the knife with a rag. Tai Yuman began to panic and scream about something. The main character turned to him and asked him to be silent. A judge appeared in the sky above them. He began to calmly make an announcement about Ju-wen. When he realized that it was Ju-wen again, he glared at the guy. The man closed his eyes in irritation and announced that a key component of the plot had been damaged. A serious split in the plot has been identified. The main elements to complete the plot are missing. To maintain game balance, game components are reassembled. Ju-wen looked at the judge with an emotionless face. The judge raised his finger up and said that the generation of game components is in progress. The estimated generation time is 180 minutes. The judge sent a warning sign towards Ju-wen and said that the plot elements already stated would not be subject to change. A restrictive tape and many warnings appeared around Ju-wen. Ju-wen will be sent to the control center for destroying key components of the game. The system will start teleporting in 3 minutes. They asked Ju-wen to prepare. The main character pointed to the black and yellow tape and said that he really could leave. Shocked, Tai Yuman opened his mouth and asked if he killed the character on purpose to get into the control center. Ju-wen smiled at him and gave him a thumbs up, answering in the affirmative. Jai Shuang crossed her arms and said that this character was deliberately targeting them. Tai Yuman, who heard this, asked her about it in surprise. Ju-wen, with a thoughtful face, diagrammed the death of the NPC and thought that if the character was killed and the game had to announce technical problems with plot debugging, then the NPC had an important clue. He suggested that this method speeds up the method of hints. Tai Yuman asked Ju-wen with a puzzled face if he had foreseen this. Tai Yuman pointed his hand in his direction and remembered that when he was a beginner, he also had a problem with reassembling game components. But the culprit was not him, but the game. The guy desperately grabbed his head and realized that there had always been problems with the game. The teleportation was supposed to happen in 2 minutes. Jai Shuang grabbed a knife and decided to also stab the dead Scandinavian woman with it. Tai Yuman asked her in shock what she was doing. The girl turned to him, holding a knife in her hand, and said that she also wanted to go to the control center. Since she had something left there, she needed to find it. Alarmed, Tai Yuman began to back away and asked if she had already been there and if she wanted to go back there. Commentators actively discussed what was happening. Ju-wen, surrounded by ribbons, replied that the Scandinavian woman was already dead and Jai Shuang need not waste time on this. The girl sighed sadly, squatting. Ju-wen put his hand under her head and asked what she wanted there. The girl pointed to her ear and replied that she needed a red earring that resembled a building. There are 5 seconds left before Ju-wen teleports. A blue interface appeared around him and he told Jai Shuang that he would take this into account. Zhao disappeared, leaving the rest of the players. The main character found himself in a long white corridor with many doors. He walked straight, not knowing where he was going. A man in uniform approached him and called Ju-wen by name. The main character looked warily at him and his comrade and asked if they were workers. There stood 2 men in masks and blue suits. One of them pointed to the door ahead and said that if he stayed inside until the game components were reassembled, the warning would be cancelled. The worker put his wrist to the door, which had a diamond painted on it. The diamond began to glow blue when the diamond cufflink was brought to it. The door to the room opened and the worker invited Zhu Wen there, saying that the reassembly time was approximately 180 minutes. Pointing to the room, the worker said that the guy should stay here all this time. Zhu Wen smiled and introduced himself, extending his hand to the worker. The man frowned, pointed at him and asked if he was here to make friends. The worker shook Zhu Wen's hand and said that he could not give his name. As they shook hands, the employee wished him luck. Zhu Wen smiled faintly and thanked him. They stopped shaking hands and Zhu Wen said goodbye to them. The gold cufflink was spinning in the air. Zhu Wen wondered if he opened the door with a cufflink and if it was some kind of access card. He tossed the cufflink into the air as he walked through the snowy village. He wanted to try to sneak the cufflink into the real world. While he was walking around the village, the overseer from the village noticed him. The warden got angry and pointed his finger at him, asking if he had escaped from prison again. Zhu Wen smiled at him and said hello. The warden began to run away, realizing what was about to happen. He didn't have time. Zhu Wen hit him with his fist and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. The warden found himself underground, with only his head sticking out. The sun brightly illuminated the eastern town and its buildings. The white room stood near the door of a large, beautiful building. They said no one was answering them. Someone asked if there really was no one inside. The blonde grabbed his head and started shouting that this was already the 5th house, and it couldn't be that there were no residents there. Kai Yueman said in frustration that he hoped to find the clues before Zhu Wen returned. Jai Shuang picked up the lock on the door. She asked Kai Yueman to move away a little while she dealt with the lock. She stuck the hairpin through the crack and twisted it a little. Kai Yueman watched this and asked if Jai Shuang could pick locks. The girl looked at him and said that old locks are not difficult to open. The lock fell off the door, succumbing to Jai Shuang's manipulation. Kai Yueman gave a thumbs up and said it was cool. After that, he made a worried face and asked if she thought that this could provoke something. Jai Shuang turned her head to him and replied that they need to do this. If there are no clues outside, then they are inside. She said that if something happens, they will split up and meet at the house. This level is large and there is room to roam. She reminded that there were 4 days left until the end of the story. Kai Yueman, remembering this, began to look worried and worried. He looked at the patterned door and said that he would open the door just in case. Jai Shuang said no, and opened the door first, ahead of Kai Yueman. The players entered the rather empty room. Jai Shuang tensed and listened. She noticed the quiet noise of footsteps and thought that the NPCs were deliberately hiding from them. The girl entered the kitchen and noticed the dishes. Kai Yueman was outside the door asking if they had found anyone. Jai Shuang came out of the kitchen with a cup in her hands and said that she needed to check other houses. Kai Yueman looked at her in confusion and asked if she would pick locks again. She made a sly expression on her face, implying an affirmative answer. They began to run through the floors of a tall historical building with a gray roof. After 20 minutes, the players found themselves on the street. Everyone except Jai Shuang looked tired. The blonde lay on the road and told Jai Shuang that her physical strength and lockpicking were incredible. Jai Shuang had a basin with various items in his hands. She held objects with one hand. The girl said that all the NPCs are foreigners, and the house designs are in Oriental style, and these items do not fit into the design. She assumed this was the prop they needed. The blonde lowered his head and said that he had been ignored. Kai Yueman, who was sweating all over his face, sarcastically suggested that he should cry. The girl with red hair looked excitedly at the toy unicorn and asked if such obvious things could be a trick. Kai Yueman tried to cool down and regain his breath. He replied that not every house had props, and not everyone could pick all the locks in 20 minutes like Jai Shuang. The guy turned to the red-haired girl and told her that the most important thing was that they had not broken the rules and did not know what both groups needed to do for now. A thumbs up appeared and an announcement was heard. It was the referee. He attracted the attention of the players. Due to severe damage to key game components, the game will increase the damage resistance of some NPCs and increase penalties at this level. The male judge looked down at the players and said that due to changes in character settings, in order to balance the game's difficulty level, Wands 8 will be lowered to Wands 7. Due to the inability to repair the damaged NPC model, the game will delete the NPC in question. The game module is in the process of being restored. The referee asked the players to wait patiently. Already explored areas will not change. Kai Yueman was shocked to realize that Zhu Wen had lowered the difficulty of the knife-throwing game. Jai Shuang looked at the items they found and suggested continuing their search. There was a warning about an important announcement. Kai Yuemin and Jai Shuang turned their heads towards the source of the sound in surprise. The judge began gesticulating and announced that due to a serious incident in the control center, the game would speed up the recovery of the script. If any errors occurred within the script, their final interpretation belongs to heaven. Kai Yuemin grabbed his chest and asked in fear what Zhu Wen was doing there. Jai Shuang seemed to glow with happiness. Previously, it was snowing in the village. There were deep snowdrifts everywhere. A horde of evil monsters with elongated faces appeared, and next to it was a crowd of sinister zombies. Zhu Wen stood on the dead warden's head with his hands in his pockets. The crowd of enemies headed straight for the guy. Zhu Wen exhaled hot steam from his mouth and said that there were quite a lot of them. Snow fell on tree branches. Suddenly, a translucent blue door appeared in the air. The door was kicked in by an employee who shouted at Zhu Wen to return his pass. Zhu Wen was sitting around the fire with the rabbit girl and older sister at this time. Above their heads were system symbols. Zhu Wen sat on the guard's corpse and asked if the girl was warm. The rabbit girl replied with a smile that she was warm. Behind them they could see a big fire. The workers were shocked when they saw this. One of them angrily walked to the side, cursing at Zhu Wen. The second worker tried to calm him down. Zhu Wen turned to them and asked what happened. The angry employee continued to swear at Zhu Wen. The man asked what he thought happened. Zhu Wen crossed his arms and said that they know, that's why he's asking them. The man began to swing at him out of anger. His colleague calmed him down and told him not to let Zhu Wen mislead them. He whispered to him that if any of the players got cufflinks, they would be finished. They both looked tense. One of the workers reached out to Zhu Wen and ordered him to return the cufflink, threatening him. Zhu Wen pretended that he didn't know and asked what kind of cufflink it was. He understood that the cufflink was a really important thing, and he had to take it with him for exploration into the real world. The worker pushed him to the ground and ordered him to stop pretending. An announcement was heard. Countdown to completion of restoration of scene number 10,098 to 5 minutes. Administrators 353 and 98 were immediately asked to release the punished player, take him to a stable zone and prepare him for teleportation. The workers realized that it was about them and raised their heads. Zhu Wen looked at them while lying on the ground and said that there were only 5 minutes left. The worker holding him looked at him questioningly. Zhu Wen broke free from his grip and ran forward, saying that there would be no second chance. He ran towards the blue door. The workers rushed after him. Zhu Wen jumped into the doorway. He smiled one last time at the workers and said goodbye. The main character slammed the door behind him. The door began to disappear, becoming more transparent. Soon the door disappeared completely, and the workers were left in the middle of a snowy location. Players from the white team are on the street. Kai Yuemin walked in circles, worried. He nervously rubbed his head and asked what Zhu Wen had done in the control center to cause such a reaction from the game. He covered his face with his palm, hoping that the main character was okay. It was announced that the generation of game components had been completed. Kai Yuemin turned his head towards the judge. The judge was floating in the sky with a very strange face. He announced that due to the fourth generation of game components, minor bugs may occur in the game and asked players not to worry. He also reminded that if any errors occur within the script, the final interpretation belongs to heaven. The judge kicked his legs while in the air. He put on a serious face and asked the players to continue exploring. From now on, the plot of the game will no longer change. Average player score 9187 points. Remaining time 92 hours 58 minutes. The players looked at the referee. He said there were 8 players left. The next second the referee disappeared, leaving the players alone. Kai Yuemin was very confused by his words that there were 8 players left, asking what was wrong with Zhu Wen. He was very angry and agitated. Jai Shuang looked at him. Kai Yuemin shook, gritting his teeth. He looked tense. Jai Shuang wanted to say something to him, but remained silent. Kai Yuemin grabbed his head anxiously and began to wonder if Zhu Wen had died and if he would return from the control center. He knew that the head of the Echo group was sensitive to the members, and he thought that after the disappearance of Zhu Wen, the head would hunt for him for at least 5 years. Kai Yuemin abruptly took out a revolver from his inventory. He began inserting bullets into the weapon's drum. The guy was really desperate. He was already ready to kill Chris and go to the control center to save Zhu Wen. The blonde was shocked at how far Kai Yuemin was willing to go. The judge appeared in the air again. He made an amendment that there were 9 players left alive. After that, he disappeared again, leaving the players alone. Kai Yuemin was the most confused. The corners of his mouth twitched, his pupils constricted. He put his hand to his forehead and angrily asked how it was possible to mix up 8 and 9. Jai Shuang turned to him and said that it looked like Zhu Wen had returned. She suggested continuing to collect props and meeting the main character later. Kai Yuman sighed wearily. They came to Chris's house where they were staying. Many delicious dishes awaited them on the table. Ju Wen was already sitting at the table and having lunch. Chris came out to the other players with a plate in her hands and invited them to a meal. The players were at a loss when they saw Ju Wen. The blonde ran towards the main character. He approached Ju Wen and told him how hungry he was. He asked him how he could ignore them and go eat while they were struggling with collecting the props. The rest of the players began to slowly sit down at the table. The red-haired girl said that by teaming up with Jai Shuang, almost anyone would die from exhaustion trying to keep up with her. Jai Shuang opened the system menu under Chris's surprised gaze. There was a bright flash of blue light. After that, the things they found today were on the table. Among them were bowls, books, bottles, and a bunch of other props. Chris tensed up sharply, frowning. She looked at Ju Wen, who had a bone in his hand. The main character put the bone back on the table. Jiang Ling, who was holding a glass, asked what he was thinking about. Ju Wen was sorting something on the table and replied that these were simple Chinese decorative things. He began to slowly move his hand to the side. With his hand he pushed the gray bowl off the table. Chris noticed this and tensed even more. She quickly ran up to the table and put her hand under the bowl, catching it. She stood up and put the cup on the table, saying with a smile that it turned out sloppy. Chris stopped smiling and began to walk away in the other direction. Jai Shuang and Ju Wen looked at her. The main character had a smile on his face. He threw the plate, which Chris caught just as deftly. After that, Jai Shuang threw a clay pot, which Chris caught. The girl jumped from side to side, trying to catch every thrown object. Ju Wen threw things with a grin on his face, while Jai Shuang threw things with a calm face. Kai Yuman held the plate in his hands and looked at them in surprise, asking what was happening this time. Some objects fell to the ground, breaking and breaking. Chris stood crouched, holding various objects on herself. Ju Wen clapped his hands and thanked Chris for his help in selecting the items, saying that the elimination method was really good. Jai Shuang looked at the horse figurine and said that the things that the NPC cannot ignore are definitely related to the task. Ju Wen looked at the pot and said that they had taken some things, but there were still some things left. He suggested checking a few more places. Chris looked very angry. She frowned and clenched her teeth. The girl began to take something out of her dress, agreeing with the players. She took out a green jade ring and said with an ominous smile that this was the key to further passage. In addition, the key is individual to their group. Jai Shuang and Ju Wen looked at Chris, puzzled. The rest of the players were shocked and horrified. Chris looked at the players through the ring with a creepy smile on her face. She shouted that without this end they would not go anywhere, even if they collected everything else. She asked if she should show them what happens when you use it. The girl quickly put the ring into her mouth. After that, she swallowed the ring. Chris opened her mouth and showed the players that the ring was gone. She started laughing. Jai Shuang and Ju Wen looked at her in surprise. After this, their faces became puzzled. The main character pointed to the laughing Chris and asked if these were the minor mistakes mentioned. Jai Shuang sighed heavily, and Ju Wen began to think about how to solve this problem. Commentators speculated about what the outcome of this game might be. Ju Wen made a very focused face. Kai Yuman frowned and noticed the protagonist's gaze. The blonde looked at them and made a serious face. Kai Yuman and the blonde ran towards Chris at lightning speed. They grabbed her by the arms, preventing her from running away. Kai Yuman ordered Ju Wen to take action. The main character asked what they were talking about. The blonde ordered him to open his inventory, take out a knife and rip open Chris's stomach. Ju Wen pretended to be embarrassed and shy, asking why he was so cruel. The blonde recalled that he had recently stabbed another NPC with a knife between the eyes. Ju Wen raised his hand and said that there was no need for them to rush because jade could not be digested, and it was safer to store things inside the girl. The blonde remembered Ju Wen saying something similar to him when he tried to rob him. Kai Yuman agreed with the main character and let the girl go. Ju Wen came closer to him and said that he and Jai Shuang would go again, and put what they found into Kai Yuman's inventory. He asked the guy to keep an eye on Chris. Kai Yuman looked at Ju Wen and asked if Jai Shuang could be trusted. The main character replied that she is like a loner, they know her, and her next actions are difficult to predict. He quietly looked at Jai Shuang and said that such people are the most suitable for cooperation. Jai Shuang turned to them and replied that she could say the same about him. Night fell outside the window. A large white moon illuminated the streets and trees. Ju Wen and Jai Shuang walked through the empty streets of the city. The girl began to twirl her hair with her fingers. She blushed slightly and looked down, saying that the moon was really beautiful today. Ju Wen looked at the sky and said that the moon looked just like mooncake. The girl did not know how to respond to such a comparison. They entered a dark alley, from where a voice was heard. Jai Shuang tensed and asked Zhu Wen if he heard it. The main character has already run forward. There were a lot of blood spatters on the stone floor. The voice said that he was in great pain and asked for help. Zhu Wen looked calm. Jai Shuang noticed something. She looked down and recognized the person who the voice belonged to. The fat man had a large bleeding cut on his stomach. His team was around him. They were very scared. The fat man asked to be saved. A mirror lay near his bloody hand. The sleeve of the girl from their team was empty. The man in the brown shirt looked at her and muttered in fear that it was all over. The girl looked doomed and empty. She didn't have a right hand. Zhu Wen approached the wounded man and asked what was going on. The man in the suit tensed and remained silent. Zhu Wen saw foam coming out of the fat man's mouth. He sat down next to it and began to look at it. The main character began to hit him on the cheeks, trying to bring him to consciousness. He grabbed the man by the collar of his t-shirt. Zhu Wen looked at the fat man, who had red cheeks and tears in his eyes, and said that he would save him, and he would tell him what happened. Zhu Wen took out a thread and a needle from his inventory. He began to quickly stitch the wounded man. The fat man began to scream shrilly in pain, tears flowing from his eyes. Zhu Wen continued to stitch the man's wound while he screamed that he was in pain. He called Zhu Wen his savior. The man screamed again, his mouth wide open. A minute later, his wound was carefully stitched with white thread. Zhu Wen put his hand on his stomach and said that he would survive this. The main character raised the fat man's head. He was unconscious. Zhu Wen asked the man in the suit to help him, because the wound could not be allowed to open, so the fat man had to be moved. The man made a disgusted face and said in disbelief that this was not according to the rules, because they were from different groups. Jai Shuang took the wounded man by the legs. She suggested taking the head and let Zhu Wen take the legs. The main character, holding the torso of the wounded man, agreed with her. They began to carefully carry the player. The girl in the shirt asked if they were going with them. The man in the brown shirt replied that they had no choice and had to come with them. They walked forward under the disapproving and tense gaze of the man in the suit. He grabbed his head in irritation, asking where this brat came from, meaning Zhu Wen. He went along with his teammates anyway. A few minutes later, both teams were in the same room. The blonde sobbed as he sat next to his wounded friend. The girl in the shirt was crying and said that the owner told them to find something. The man next to her put his arm around her. Kai Yuman looked at her and asked if she was talking about ghosts. The girl's gaze looked doomed and insane. She looked at her missing arm and said that every day a body part would be taken from one of them. These words made the red-haired girl and Kai Yuman terrified. The man in the shirt turned pale and lowered his head, saying that the owner of the house called it payment for housing, and if they did not find what they needed, then everyone would die. Zhu Wen clasped his hands together and asked what they ultimately wanted. The man began to shake with fear. Zhu Wen looked at him and asked if he could tell. The man in the suit raised his hand, attracting Zhu Wen's attention. He looked at him and said that in this game they were risking their lives, and they could not give out information unilaterally. The man stood up from the table and thanked him for his help, but said they couldn't tell them everything they knew. He said that he would repay the item that Zhu Wen used to stitch the wound with 3 items of the same rarity. He was serious. Zhu Wen made a thoughtful face after being silent for a while. He turned to his team and asked their opinion. They agreed to such conditions. Zhu Wen turned to the man and accepted his terms. He said that in reality their process is almost zero. All they know is that they need to find theatrical props. All the players from both teams looked sharply at the injured player. He, lying on the floor, said that what was found should be returned to the appropriate owner, but he was mistaken. The man in the suit aggressively hit the table and rudely asked if he understood what group he was from. The fat man smiled slightly and said that he knew what was on his mind, because his objects were just trash. He sweated a little and said that Zhu Wen saved his life. He pointed his hand at the main character and said that he would give them a hint in gratitude for saving them. Zhu Wen looked at him and asked how many props they found and how many needed to be found in total. He replied that they found 5, but they needed 12 in total. Zhu Wen confidently replied that they found 7, which means everything is ready. In surprise, the fat man spat out the water. The man in the suit jumped up and asked if he really called this zero progress. Kai Yuman told him not to worry, because they only realized the significance of the props after their words. He looked down and said that they were really brave, because they did this with only 5 things. If there are 4 owners of the house, among the 5 things you may not find what you need. The fat man looked at the floor. The girl in the shirt continued to cry. She said that they had to, because if they don't pay, there will be no mercy. The blonde man approached Zhu Wen from behind. He crouched down to the main character and asked if all they were really missing was the ring from Chris' belly. He asked if they would pass the level if they got the ring. Zhu Wen turned away and said that he was too optimistic. He replied that they were still far from finished, because they didn't even know who to give what to. Zhu Wen looked at the clock hanging on the wall. The clock showed 6 o'clock. Zhu Wen stood up from his chair and said that it would not be easy, but it was worth a try. Kai Yuman tensed and asked what he was up to again. Zhu Wen's eyes seemed to light up and he said it was time to get the ring out of Chris. Chris stood in the kitchen, sharpening a knife. Suddenly she felt someone's presence behind her. The ominous silhouette of Zhu Wen appeared behind her. Chris turned to him in fear. Zhu Wen suddenly threw something into the air with one movement of his hand. Chris looked up in confusion with her mouth slightly open. The girl reached for the falling plate. Zhu Wen took out a knife. The plate almost fell into Chris's hands, but Zhu Wen was already running towards it at that time. He sharply thrust the knife into the girl's neck. The dead girl lay on the floor covered in her own blood. Zhu Wen looked at her with disappointment. He thought she would be good in close combat. Zhu Wen inserted a knife into Chris's stomach. Kai Yuman and the blonde looked in horror as the main character mercilessly ripped open her intestines. The blonde vomited after this terrible sight. Zhu Wen said that it was empty. Chris's dismembered body lay on the floor. The blonde tried to hold back the urge to vomit again. He asked what Zhu Wen meant. Jai Shuang approached him and replied that Chris ate and digested the key item due to a mistake. The blonde made a dissatisfied face and asked how they could pass the level now. He walked up to Zhu Wen and grabbed him by the collar, rudely asking why he was dragging the entire team down and why he was pissing off the NPCs. His friend, sitting on the sofa, tried to calm him down. The blonde let go of Zhu Wen and began to be indignant. A judge appeared in the room, and the surprise scared some people. The judge showed the system window, minus 200 points. He said that Zhu Wen harmed a character that cannot be attacked and received a penalty of 200 points. He warned players that if their score dropped to 0, they would be removed from the game. Zhu Wen made a thoughtful face and asked if he should go to the control center. The judge looked at him irritably and did not answer. Zhu Wen smiled awkwardly and rubbed the back of his head, apologizing to everyone. After that, Zhu Wen grinned and said that they will not die here because he has an idea. He turned to Kai Yuman. The guy, resigned to this, covered his face and told him to do whatever he wanted. Zhu Wen turned to Jai Shuang and she said that she didn't mind. He looked at the rest of the team. The blonde grabbed his face and said that the game was already lost. But since he saved his friend's life, then he agrees with him. The girl with red hair said that she no longer had a choice. Zhu Wen took out a piece of cloth. He began to spread the cloth on the floor. After that, the main character put all the props there, saying that they were starting. The commentators didn't understand what he was up to. The guy folded the fabric together, turning it into a bag, and called the man in the suit with him. The man pointed at himself, asking if he was calling him. Zhu Wen was tying the cloth. He threw the bag over his shoulder and told him to go with it. He opened the door and saw Chris, who told him that he no longer needed these things. She had a crazy expression on her face and asked where Zhu Wen was going. The man pointed his finger at her and asked in fear why she was responding. Zhu Wen cut her throat open with a knife in one motion. The judge appeared behind them again and angrily fined Zhu Wen once again. Someone pushed him, which made him confused. Chris ran towards them with a katana, asking where Zhu Wen was going. The bullet passed through her head with lightning speed. The girl began to fall, hitting the floor and rolling backwards. Her dead body lay at Zhu Wen's feet. He and the man in the suit were shocked. Kai Yuman held a smoking revolver in his hands and urged them on, saying that time was running out. The judge, who had already lost his composure, fined Kai Yuman 200 points. The blonde looked at this with a lost look. He said that the more points, the more danger, but if you do not beat the game, you will have to die. Completion increases the score by point, inevitably increasing the difficulty level. He realized that now he could just drop his glasses. As soon as this thought came to his mind, he immediately stopped being confused and said that this was great. Another Chris attacked the players. The blonde waved his knife with a grin. Chris tried to stop him with her katana. Zhu Wen stabbed Chris in the stomach, then Jai Shuang tried to attack as well. Chris clamped her teeth on the gun that Kai Yuman had inserted into her mouth. Zhu Wen and Jai Shuang stood with their backs to each other. The girl said that Chris's strength is increasing. Zhu Wen pointed back and asked if she could handle it. He said that if she couldn't handle it, he would tell her what to do. Jai Shuang, holding a knife in her hands, said that there were a lot of people, so they would hold out. Zhu Wen handed her a knife and asked if she could fight with her left hand. Jai Shuang began to twist both knives in her hands and replied that she could, but worse than the right one. Zhu Wen walked to the door and asked her to stop Chris from catching up with him. He grabbed the man in the suit by the scruff of the neck. Together with him, he quickly ran out into the street. The main character dragged him along the ground. The man asked what his plan was. Zhu Wen replied that he was helping them return the items. The man tensed and asked what would happen if their team completed the level. Zhu Wen put on a serious face and, without stopping, said that his team would go to the repeat competition. The man began to remember how Zhu Wen asked his teammates for their opinions about his plan. The man wondered how they generally communicate and make decisions in their team. Zhu Wen suddenly stopped and let the man go. The main character asked where the props were that his team used to pay. The man fell on his back and began to rub it. He replied that out of fear he left the props in the NPC's house. He pointed to a house in the distance and said it was where the dark blue door was. Zhu Wen walked straight to the door. The man tried to stop him, begging him to discuss everything. He said that if Zhu Wen made a mistake, the whole team would feel bad, and the wrong thing would come out of his stomach. Zhu Wen kicked the doors off their hinges, surprising the man. The main character took out his phone and shouted to the owner of the house to hurry up and pick up his things. The man was shocked by his actions.